Tonight, we delve into the compelling narrative of the sole African empire that steadfastly confronted European colonizers, unequivocally asserting its sovereignty. For more than 3 millennia, Ethiopia meticulously forged one of the most illustrious civilizations on Earth, maintaining its unique identity while other nations in the continent succumbed to partitioning, much like a ceremonial cake at a colonial gathering. Our exploration encompasses the comprehensive chronicle of a people who, without exception, consistently refused to yield to external dominance. Prepare to journey through time as we uncover the fascinating transformation of a rugged highland kingdom nestled in the Horn of Africa into the very fabric of legend. This formidable state masterfully established intricate trading networks that spanned from the grand cities of Rome to the distant shores of India, simultaneously erecting colossal stone obelisks whose architectural precision would compel even contemporary engineers to consult their advanced calculations. It cultivated a distinctive variant of Christianity, so profoundly unique that early European missionaries, upon encountering it, were often perplexed, inquiring about its precise theological foundations. Through an unwavering and brilliant tenacity, Ethiopia preserved its autonomy for over 3 millennia, even devising its own intricate calendar system, seemingly because the conventional Gregorian system lacked the particular Ethiopian character. Remarkably, this land managed to be both the cradle of humanity's earliest fossil discoveries and the birthplace of its most enduring empire, all while navigating relentless invasions, devastating famines, and the persistent necessity to declare to the global community that Ethiopia extends its spiritual devotion to God, rather than to any encroaching colonial powers. Within the elevated terrains of Africa, where the ethereal morning mist gracefully intertwines with ancient whispered secrets, and where the first coffee beans subtly imparted their rich, aromatic promises to humankind, there thrived a civilization of such profound antiquity that it seemingly recalled the nascent stages of the world itself. This is the monumental saga of Ethiopia, a territory that never capitulated, never conceded, and astonishingly managed to safeguard its independence, while the remainder of the African continent was systematically dismembered, akin to a particularly contentious confection at a colonial supper. Our epic commences not with the resounding clang of weaponry or the thunderous beat of war drums, but rather with the gentle, rhythmic ebb and flow of waves against a faraway coastline, and with the enchanting presence of a queen whose unparalleled beauty was reputedly comparable to the celestial bodies themselves. However, prior to our introduction to this fabled monarch, let us pause momentarily and envision ourselves gathered by a cheerfully crackling fire, perhaps cradling a warm cup of that very coffee which Ethiopia bestowed upon the world, and ready ourselves to embark upon a profound temporal expedition spanning more than 3,000 years. The narrative of Ethiopia unfolds like an ancient river that has ceaselessly flowed for millennia, at times surging powerfully through dramatic, imposing gorges, and at other Junes meandering serenely through fertile, verdant valleys, yet always, perpetually advancing forward. It is a chronicle replete with kingdoms that ascended and receded with the predictable grace of the sun traversing the majestic Simeon Mountains, of emperors who proudly asserted their direct lineage from the venerable King Solomon, and of a tenacious populace who, when confronted by the formidable colonial might of Europe, essentially conveyed a resolute message of self-sufficiency and refusal. In the distant past, when the awe-inspiring pyramids of Egypt were still regarded as cutting-edge architectural marvels, and the city of Rome existed merely as a nascent concept in its founder's imagination. The territory destined to become Ethiopia was already teeming with vibrant activity. The venerable kingdom of DMT prospered in the northern highlands during approximately the 8th century BCE. These pioneering Ethiopians already exhibited early indicators of the resolute independence that would distinctly characterize their successive generations. They meticulously forged their own indigenous writing system, constructed impressive stone monuments of considerable scale, and likely observed their neighboring societies, concluding with quiet conviction. We are perfectly capable of establishing and managing this entire civilization endeavor ourselves, with no external assistance required. Nevertheless, it was the formidable kingdom of Aksum that truly etched Ethiopia onto the global map of the ancient world, making an undeniably spectacular and impactful entrance. Emerging around the 1st century CE, Aksum swiftly ascended to become one of the preeminent trading powers of antiquity, standing as an undisputed peer alongside influential empires such as Rome, Persia, and China. The Aksumites were a people of profound strategic vision, perceiving the vast expanse of the Red Sea not as an insurmountable barrier, but rather as an expansive maritime thoroughfare to immense prosperity. They meticulously constructed a sprawling maritime empire that extended across the Red Sea into Yemen, and their astute merchants became a ubiquitous presence in the bustling ports of India and Sri Lanka, as familiar and anticipated as the annual monsoon rains. The capital metropolis of Aksum was an architectural wonder that would undoubtedly have inspired profound admiration and even envy among ancient urban planners. Imposing obelisks, carved from monolithic pieces of granite, majestically pierced the sky, some towering over 100 feet in height, resembling colossal stone fingers pointing reverently towards the heavens. These structures were far more than mere testaments to royal vanity, though a degree of that impulse likely existed. They served as solemn markers for royal interments and potent symbols of the kingdom's formidable power. The grandest of these obelisks, had its erection been successfully completed, would have surpassed the height of any edifice constructed in the ancient world. Regrettably, it toppled during its construction, an event that must have represented the ancient equivalent of a monumentally costly and conspicuously public engineering failure. One can readily imagine the Aksumite monarch surveying the fallen monolith, perhaps muttering an expletive that, in modern parlance, might approximate, "Well, that particular achievement will certainly not be featured on my royal curriculum vitae." The Aksumites were also among the earliest adherents to Christianity, embracing the faith in the 4th century CE under the enlightened reign of King Azana, thereby establishing Ethiopia as one of the world's inaugural Christian nations. This pivotal adoption transcended a mere political expediency. It constituted a profound spiritual and cultural metamorphosis that would indelibly shape Ethiopian identity for millennia to come. The enduring legend recounts that a youthful Syrian Christian named Frumentius, after being tragically shipwrecked on the Ethiopian coastline, eventually assumed the esteemed role of tutor to the royal princes, subsequently introducing Christian doctrines to the imperial court. It stands as a quintessential narrative illustrating how the most profound and lasting societal transformations are often born not from military conquest or coercive force, but through the understated yet persistent influence of a devoted and knowledgeable educator. Frumentius later ascended to become Ethiopia's first bishop, likely never conceiving that his profound impact would continue to resonate more than 1,600 years into the future. However, let us now redirect our focus to the enigmatic queen previously alluded to, for no comprehensive account of ancient Ethiopia would be complete without acknowledging the legendary Queen of Sheba. While contemporary historians often posit that the Queen of Sheba might have originated from Yemen, or perhaps represented a composite figure derived from several distinct rulers, or indeed might be entirely mythical, the Ethiopian people have consistently disregarded such historical ambiguities in favor of a compelling narrative. They assert their claim to her legacy with an unwavering conviction born from the understanding that possession, even in the annals of ancient history, is often 9/10 of the law. According to the deeply ingrained Ethiopian tradition, the Queen of Sheba, revered locally as Queen Makeda, upon hearing astonishing accounts of King Solomon's unparalleled wisdom, resolved to undertake a diplomatic visit to Jerusalem. This was no ordinary royal excursion. It represented the ancient world's equivalent of a high-stakes summit meeting between two formidable geopolitical entities. The Queen arrived in Jerusalem accompanied by a caravan so profusely laden with gold, exotic spices, and precious gemstones that it likely engendered the earliest recorded instance of significant urban congestion. Solomon, not to be outdone in hospitality or grandeur, welcomed her with such extraordinary magnificence that their momentous encounter swiftly became the stuff of enduring legend. The Ethiopian rendition of these historical events takes a particularly intriguing turn at this juncture. As documented in the venerable Kebra Nagast, or Glory of the Kings, the Queen and Solomon developed a profound romantic bond that culminated in the birth of a son named Menelik I, who was destined to become the progenitor of the illustrious Ethiopian imperial dynasty. The narrative further recounts that when Menelik attained maturity, he journeyed to Jerusalem to visit his royal father, and Solomon, in his renowned wisdom, presented his son with a meticulously crafted replica of the sacred Ark of the Covenant. However, Menelik's astute companions, acting with either remarkable ingenuity or mischievous intent, ingeniously swapped the replica for the authentic Ark. Consequently, in accordance with profound Ethiopian tradition, the genuine Ark of the Covenant has purportedly resided within Ethiopia for the past 3 millennia, specifically enshrined within the hallowed confines of the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum. Now, irrespective of one's personal credence in this extraordinary narrative, and it is pertinent to observe that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church safeguards this venerable claim with a degree of intense secrecy that might well evoke admiration from modern intelligence agencies, it profoundly illuminates a fundamental aspect of Ethiopian identity. This is a nation that has consistently perceived itself as divinely chosen, as uniquely special, and as intimately connected to the sacred in ways that intrinsically differentiate it from its neighboring states. This inherent confidence would prove to be an invaluable asset in the ensuing centuries, particularly when confronted with monumental challenges that would undoubtedly have shattered lesser nations. The Aksumite kingdom attained its zenith around the 6th century CE, a period marked by King Caleb's decisive launch of a significant military expedition across the Red Sea into Yemen, primarily aimed at safeguarding persecuted Christians residing there. This undertaking transcended a mere humanitarian rescue operation. It served as a powerful demonstration of Aksum's formidable military might and extensive geopolitical reach. The Aksumites successfully conquered Yemen and subsequently installed a Christian monarch, unequivocally showcasing their capacity to project power across maritime distances when strategic imperatives demanded it. It was precisely this caliber of audacious maneuver that proclaimed to the international community that Aksum was not merely a dominant regional power, but an influential and formidable player on the global stage. Nevertheless, akin to all grand and enduring kingdoms, Aksum eventually encountered formidable challenges that severely tested its inherent resilience. The ascendance of Islam in the 7th century profoundly reconfigured the dynamics of Red Sea trade, as burgeoning Muslim merchant networks began to exert dominance over the crucial maritime routes that had historically underpinned Aksum's immense wealth. Furthermore, the pervasive impact of climate change, indeed, climatic shifts, were profoundly influencing civilizations long before the advent of modern motorized vehicles, contributed significantly to a marked decline in agricultural productivity. Consequently, the once mighty kingdom that had previously stood as an equal to the Roman Empire gradually commenced an inward retreat, shifting its strategic focus increasingly towards the secure highlands and diminishing its reliance on extensive maritime commerce. A significant shift occurred, redirecting the nation's focus predominantly towards its internal affairs and terrestrial resources, lessening its reliance on overseas commerce. This profound reorientation inaugurated what historical scholars refer to as the Dark Ages in Ethiopian chronology. However, to label any epoch of Ethiopia's illustrious past as truly dark is akin to describing a twilight sky as devoid of luminosity. There invariably exists some enduring brilliance. During this span, roughly from the 7th to the 11th centuries, the Ethiopian realm experienced heightened seclusion from the global community. Yet, this very isolation proved instrumental in fostering the maturation of a singularly Ethiopian Christian culture, destined to become one of the most distinct worldwide. It was precisely within this era that Ethiopian Christianity began to forge its defining characteristics. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, while maintaining its spiritual ties to the broader Christian ecumene, organically developed its own unique traditions, its particular calendar, and its singular theological understanding of the divine faith. Ethiopian monastic communities embarked upon the monumental task of excavating churches directly from the living rock, thereby creating architectural wonders that seemingly defied both the pull of gravity and conventional engineering wisdom. These magnificent subterranean sanctuaries, particularly those located in the sacred town of Lalibela, stand as testaments to one of humankind's most extraordinary architectural feats. One might endeavor to envision the sheer audacity of electing to sculpt a sacred edifice from solid volcanic rock, replete with intricate embellishments, concealed passages, and acoustically perfect interiors, rather than constructing a conventional building upon the ground. Such an undertaking would undoubtedly prompt contemporary engineers to consult their calculations with trepidation, perhaps then discreetly advocating for the construction of a more manageable timber structure. The most renowned among these monolithic churches is Bet Georgis, the Church of St. George at Lalibela, meticulously carved in the form of an impeccable Greek cross and descending deep into the earth's crust. Folklore suggests that angelic beings descended nightly to continue the arduous work initiated by mortal hands during the day, a narrative that can be interpreted either as a sublime manifestation of faith or as the earliest recorded instance of delegating construction responsibilities to celestial contractors. Irrespective of interpretation, the outcome is utterly breathtaking, a sanctuary that appears to organically emerge from the very ground, as though the rock itself had been persuaded to assume a hallowed form. Nevertheless, Ethiopia's period of insularity was not fated to persist indefinitely. By the 12th century, a new imperial lineage arose, poised to redefine the kingdom and reintegrate it into the broader global tapestry. The Zagwe dynasty, which held sway from approximately 1137 to 1270 CE, signified a geographical redistribution of Ethiopian power, shifting its epicenter from the northern Aksumite territories to the central highlands. The Zagwe monarchs distinguished themselves as prodigious builders and fervent patrons of the church, and it was under their enlightened patronage that many of Ethiopia's most celebrated rock-hewn churches were brought into being. The most illustrious of the Zagwe sovereigns was King Lalibela, whose very name graces the town that now safeguards Ethiopia's most spectacular assemblage of rock-cut churches. Lalibela possessed a profound vision, one traditionally believed to be divinely inspired, to establish a new Jerusalem amidst the Ethiopian highlands. This ambition transcended mere religious fervor. It represented a pragmatic response to the geopolitical reality that Muslim dominion over the Holy Land rendered pilgrimage to the original Jerusalem exceedingly perilous for Ethiopian Christians. Consequently, Lalibela resolved to transplant Jerusalem to Ethiopia, complete with sanctuaries bearing the names of their Holy Land counterparts and a local river rechristened the Jordan. The actual construction of Lalibela's churches constituted an endeavor that would formidably challenge even the most advanced modern engineering capabilities. Each individual church was meticulously chiseled from a singular, colossal block of volcanic rock, with master craftsmen systematically working downwards from the top, carefully excavating stone to fashion walls, structural pillars, windows, and intricate decorative motifs. The level of precision demanded for such work was truly extraordinary. A single miscalculation could irrevocably compromise years of painstaking labor. It epitomizes the sort of monumental project that would have compelled medieval health and safety inspectors to brandish their parchments and express profound incredulity. Beyond their architectural marvels, the Zagwe era also witnessed a vibrant efflorescence of Ethiopian artistry and literary expression. Ethiopian scribes cultivated a distinctive aesthetic in manuscript illumination, seamlessly blending traditional Christian motifs with indigenous artistic sensibilities. These invaluable manuscripts, meticulously inscribed on vellum crafted from goat or sheep hide, were adorned with vivid polychromatic hues and elaborate geometric patterns, reflecting both the sophisticated refinement of Ethiopian artistic culture and the profound spiritual devotion of their creators. The scribes responsible for these masterpieces were not simply copying sacred texts. They were consciously generating works of art designed to inspire and edify, to imbue the divine word with tangible life through compelling visual beauty. Yet the ascendancy of the Zagwe dynasty was destined to be finite. In 1270 CE, their rule was decisively overthrown by a new imperial lineage that asserted direct lineal descent from the legendary King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, the Solomonic dynasty. This momentous transition was not merely a change in governance. It was proclaimed as a profound restoration, at least according to the meticulously crafted narrative disseminated by the new dynasty's ideological apparatus. The Solomonic emperors vociferously contended that the Zagwe had been illegitimate usurpers, and that they were now reinstating the rightful ancient line of Ethiopian monarchs, a lineage purportedly stretching back to Menelik I, the fabled son of Solomon and Sheba. The progenitor of this re-established Solomonic dynasty was Yekuno Amlak, whose name, signifying "Let the Lord rise," could be interpreted either as a solemn declaration of religious piety or as the ancient equivalent of a potent political campaign slogan. Yekuno Amlak strategically established his imperial capital within the central highlands and embarked upon a systematic process of extending Ethiopian suzerainty over the contiguous regions. This expansionist policy transcended mere territorial conquest. It was fundamentally driven by the ambitious objective of forging a cohesive Christian kingdom capable of serving as an unwavering beacon of faith in a geopolitical landscape increasingly dominated by burgeoning Muslim powers. Under the sagacious rule of the Solomonic dynasty, Ethiopia entered what many historical authorities now regard as its golden age. The empire significantly augmented its territorial boundaries, cultivated a remarkably sophisticated administrative framework, and emerged as a preeminent actor in regional geopolitics. Ethiopian military forces marched southward into the ancestral domains of the Oromo and Sidama peoples, extended their reach eastward towards the Somali coastline, and ventured westward into the borderlands adjacent to Sudan. This expansive growth incorporated new populations, distinct cultures, and novel challenges into the Ethiopian imperial fold, thereby creating a remarkably diverse realm that was skillfully maintained through a judicious blend of formidable military prowess, astute administrative acumen, and profound religious devotion. One of the most remarkable facets of medieval Ethiopia was its commendable religious tolerance, particularly when assessed against the prevailing norms of the era. While the empire was officially Christian, and the reigning emperor was revered as the supreme defender of the faith, Ethiopian rulers generally extended to their Muslim and adherents of traditional indigenous religions the liberty to practice their beliefs unmolested, provided they fulfilled their fiscal obligations and refrained from acts of rebellion. This pragmatic approach to managing religious pluralism stemmed partly from practical necessity. Governing such a heterogeneous empire demanded a certain degree of administrative flexibility. However, it also reflected a deep-seated confidence within Ethiopian Christianity itself, which evidently felt unthreatened by the presence of other spiritual traditions. The Ethiopian Church during this epoch developed several unique characteristics that conspicuously distinguished it from other Christian traditions worldwide. Ethiopian Christianity consciously integrated elements of ancient Jewish law and practice, encompassing dietary restrictions, ritual circumcision, and the observance of the Sabbath on Saturday as well as Sunday. This was not a superficial act of syncretism. Rather, it profoundly reflected the Ethiopian Church's deeply held self-conception as the legitimate heir to ancient Israel, the sacred custodian of the Ark of the Covenant, and the authentic continuation of biblical tradition. Ethiopian Christians perceived themselves not as recent converts to an imported religion, but as the true inheritors of the oldest and most pristine manifestation of the faith. The 14th and 15th centuries unequivocally marked the zenith of Ethiopian imperial power and influence, presided over by formidable emperors such as Amda Seyon I and Zara Yacob. The Ethiopian Empire solidified its position as a major regional hegemon, commanding profound respect from its immediate neighbors and attracting considerable attention from distant lands. Ethiopian merchants engaged in extensive trade networks that stretched across India, Arabia, and the Mediterranean world, importing not merely exotic commodities, but also invaluable ideas, advanced technologies, and diverse cultural influences that immeasurably enriched Ethiopian civilization. It was during this flourishing period that Ethiopia first captured the imagination of medieval Europe. Although initial perceptions were often more rooted in sanguine conjecture than in accurate factual intelligence, European Christians, facing immense pressure from the relentless expansion of Muslim empires across the Mediterranean and within the Holy Land, began to circulate captivating rumors of a magnificent Christian kingdom situated somewhere in the distant reaches of Africa or Asia, ruled by an enigmatic figure known as Prester John. This legendary Christian monarch was said to preside over a sprawling empire replete with astonishing wonders, rivers flowing with gold, fabled fountains of eternal youth, and vast armies of fantastical creatures poised to march to the succor of their European co-religionists. The actual reality, as is frequently the case, proved far more intricate than the embellished legend. Ethiopia was indeed a Christian kingdom, and it certainly wielded considerable power. Yet it was concurrently grappling with its own internal challenges and navigating its own distinct national priorities. When Portuguese explorers finally established direct contact with Ethiopia in the nascent years of the 16th century, they encountered not the mythical realm of Prester John, but a sophisticated African civilization boasting its own venerable traditions, its unique theological understanding of Christianity, and its well-defined strategies for engaging with the wider global community. The arrival of the Portuguese in Ethiopia tragically coincided with one of the most profoundly challenging epochs in the nation's long and storied history. In the early 16th century, the Ethiopian Empire found itself confronted by a colossal invasion launched from the Sultanate of Adal, spearheaded by a charismatic yet utterly ruthless military leader known as Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, more commonly referred to as Gragn the Left-Handed. This incursion was not merely another localized border skirmish. It represented an existential threat to the very fabric of Ethiopian civilization. Gran's formidable forces, strategically armed with firearms procured from the formidable Ottoman Empire and galvanized by intense religious fervor, swept through the Ethiopian highlands with the destructive force of a raging wildfire, systematically obliterating ancient churches, incinerating invaluable manuscripts, and coercing widespread conversions to Islam. The dire situation escalated with the imposition of widespread religious conversions to Islam. The Ethiopian nation's reaction to this profound crisis illuminated both the inherent strengths and latent vulnerabilities of their ancient civilization. Emperor Libna Dengel, caught entirely unprepared by the astonishing rapidity and sheer brutality of the encroaching invasion, found himself compelled to abandon his imperial seat and initiate a prolonged guerrilla campaign from the rugged mountain redoubts. For more than a decade, the very existence of Ethiopia hung precariously in the balance, as the formidable forces of Gran asserted dominance over the vast majority of the empire's sprawling territory. It was amidst this profoundly bleak epoch that the Ethiopians arrived at a momentous decision, one that would inevitably cast a long shadow over their future. They formally petitioned the Portuguese crown for crucial military intervention. The Portuguese response to this urgent plea was characterized by its remarkable alacrity and decisive nature. A relatively modest contingent of 400 Portuguese musketeers, under the intrepid leadership of Cristóvão da Gama, the distinguished son of the renowned navigator Vasco da Gama, disembarked upon the Ethiopian coastline. From there, they courageously advanced inland to lend their formidable support to the beleaguered Ethiopian resistance. The introduction of Portuguese firearms, notably their advanced muskets, coupled with their superior military tactics and strategic expertise, proved instrumental in shifting the precarious equilibrium of the conflict, though this decisive aid was not without significant cost. Tragically, Cristóvão da Gama himself was apprehended and subsequently executed by Ahmad Grang. Yet his ultimate sacrifice served as a powerful catalyst, galvanizing both the Portuguese and Ethiopian combatants. In the pivotal year of 1543, during the momentous Battle of Ouénadaga, Ahmad Grang met his demise, struck down by a Portuguese musket ball, leading to the immediate and catastrophic collapse of his entire army. The conclusive defeat of Ahmad Grang effectively safeguarded Ethiopia's cherished independence, but it simultaneously heralded the commencement of a novel and intricately complex relationship with the burgeoning European powers. Having played a pivotal role in preserving Ethiopia's sovereignty, the Portuguese, quite understandably, anticipated a measure of gratitude and, more significantly, a degree of influence in reciprocation. Their arrival brought not merely military succor, but also a dedicated cadre of Jesuit missionaries, whose unwavering objective was to bring the venerable Ethiopian Orthodox Church into doctrinal alignment and communion with the Roman Catholic See. This ambitious endeavor precipitated one of the most tumultuous and religiously charged periods in Ethiopia's protracted history. As successive emperors found themselves grappling with the formidable challenge of balancing their profound appreciation for Portuguese assistance with an unyielding commitment to the deeply entrenched traditions of Ethiopian orthodoxy. Emperor Susenyos, whose reign spanned the years from 1607 to 1632, made the profoundly impactful and ultimately fateful decision to personally convert to Catholicism and, with imperial decree, proclaim it the official state religion of Ethiopia. This was far from being a mere private spiritual conviction. It constituted a veritable political earthquake, sending powerful tremors throughout Ethiopian society and threatening its very foundations. The emperor's dramatic conversion ignited a widespread and fervent rebellion as Ethiopian nobles, the esteemed clergy, and common people alike vehemently repudiated what they perceived as an egregious foreign imposition upon their ancient and sacred faith. The nation descended into a brutal and protracted civil war, with brother fighting brother and communities tragically fractured by the bitter acrimony of religious strife. The national situation deteriorated to such an extreme degree that Susenyos, reportedly on his deathbed, conveyed a poignant and profoundly self-aware message to his son and designated heir. "I have finished the kingdom. You restore it." This stands, perhaps, as one of the most brutally honest assessments ever articulated by a ruler concerning the calamitous impact of their own reign. His son, Fasilides, absorbed this counsel with solemn resolve, immediately undertaking a comprehensive reversal of his father's controversial religious policies. He swiftly expelled the Jesuit missionaries from the empire and unequivocally reinstated Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity as the official state religion. The Portuguese, who had once been hailed as saviors and welcomed with open arms, suddenly discovered themselves declared persona non grata in the very land they had so recently helped to preserve. Fasilides' transformative actions extended far beyond mere religious restoration. He also meticulously implemented a sweeping policy of national isolation, a doctrine that would indelibly shape Ethiopia's trajectory for the ensuing 2 centuries. Foreign nationals were explicitly prohibited from entering the country's borders, and, conversely, Ethiopians were strictly forbidden from venturing abroad. It was as if the entire empire had collectively decided to hoist its drawbridge, retreating behind its ramparts to patiently await a time when the wider world might become a more reasonable and less meddlesome place. This strategic isolation was not born of an inherent xenophobia, but rather emerged from the hard-won wisdom gleaned from the intricate complications that inevitably accompanied foreign entanglements. The Ethiopians had, through bitter experience, learned that accepting aid from European powers was akin to extending an invitation to a vampire. Once granted entry, their departure proved exceedingly difficult to orchestrate. During this extended period of self-imposed isolation, Fasilides oversaw the establishment of a magnificent new imperial capital at Gondar, strategically situated within the northern highlands. Gondar was destined to serve as the vibrant heart of the Ethiopian Empire for more than 2 centuries, and under the successive reigns of Fasilides and his royal descendants, it blossomed into one of the most resplendent and architecturally significant cities on the African continent. The emperors of Gondar commissioned and constructed an impressive array of imposing castles and grand palaces which masterfully fused indigenous Ethiopian architectural traditions with subtle influences absorbed from their brief, yet impactful, encounters with European and Middle Eastern cultures. These distinctive structures, characterized by their iconic round towers and intricately crenellated walls, collectively sculpted a unique and instantly recognizable skyline that was quintessentially Ethiopian, embodying a synthesis that was neither purely African nor European, but rather something entirely original and sui generis. The Gondarine period, as this epoch is historically designated, was profoundly marked by a vibrant flowering of Ethiopian culture and intellectual pursuits. The very isolation that rigorously excluded foreign presence concurrently provided an unhindered environment for the organic development of Ethiopian traditions, free from external interference. Ethiopian artists meticulously perfected their highly distinctive style of religious painting, producing exquisite works that skillfully blended Byzantine iconographic influences with deeply rooted local artistic conventions, thereby creating something unmistakably Ethiopian in its aesthetic and spiritual essence. Concurrently, Ethiopian scholars assiduously compiled, transcribed, and preserved ancient texts, meticulously safeguarding the rich literary heritage of their civilization for the enlightenment and benefit of future generations. Yet, perhaps most significantly, the Gondarine period witnessed the profound crystallization of what might accurately be termed the Ethiopian national character, a robust amalgam of fierce pride, unwavering independence, profound religious devotion, and an unyielding, stubborn resistance to any form of outside interference, qualities that would prove invaluable in confronting the numerous challenges yet to unfold. The populace of this era cultivated a profound aphorism that loosely translates to "Ethiopia stretches her hands unto God," a powerful reflection of their deeply held conviction that their nation enjoyed divine protection and was divinely ordained to play a unique and special role within God's grand design for the world. The Gondarine emperors were also continually confronted with the persistent and formidable challenge of effectively governing a vast and inherently diverse empire. Ethiopia, by its very historical nature, was never a homogeneous nation. Rather, it constituted a rich and complex mosaic of distinct peoples, myriad languages, and varied cultural practices, all held together by a delicate interplay of imperial authority, a unifying religious faith, and shared ancestral traditions. Among these diverse constituents, the Oromo people, who had commenced their migratory movements into Ethiopian territory since the 16th century, presented a particularly nuanced and dynamic challenge. The Oromo were not a conquered or subjugated populace. Instead, they were an energetic and adaptable people who progressively integrated themselves into the broader Ethiopian societal fabric, while steadfastly preserving their own unique cultural identity. This intricate process of integration was not uniformly seamless, often punctuated by periods of conflict and underlying tensions. Yet, with the passage of time, the Oromo ascended to become an indispensable and integral component of Ethiopian civilization, enriching the imperial structure with their distinct traditions, formidable military skills, and well-developed political systems. The dawn of the 18th century ushered in a new array of formidable challenges for the Ethiopian Empire. While the protracted period of national isolation had undeniably succeeded in preserving Ethiopia's cherished independence, it had concurrently resulted in the country lagging considerably in terms of military technology and the overall efficiency of its administrative apparatus. Of even greater consequence, the imperial structure began to undergo a significant process of fragmentation as regional nobles incrementally asserted greater autonomy from the central government. This turbulent epoch, historically known as the Era of the Princes or Zemene Mesafint, witnessed the effective dissolution of the Ethiopian Empire into a disparate collection of competing principalities. Each of these was governed by a powerful local noble who, while paying nominal fealty to the emperor residing in Gondar, in reality exercised absolute and independent dominion within their respective territories. The era of the princes, despite its political decentralization, should not be universally condemned as a dark age. Indeed, numerous regions experienced considerable prosperity under the stewardship of local rule, and the vibrant tapestry of Ethiopian culture continued its dynamic evolution and flourishing. However, it unequivocally represented a profound and significant weakening of the central imperial authority. The emperor, though nominally the head of state, was effectively reduced to little more than a ceremonial figurehead, confined to his palatial residence in Gondar, and wielding no substantive power beyond the immediate confines of the city walls. It was precisely during this period of imperial impotence that a famous and poignant saying gained widespread currency. "He reigns but does not rule," a stark and accurate descriptor referring to the powerless emperors who maintained the outward forms and symbolic trappings of imperial authority, while actual power lay firmly entrenched in the hands of formidable regional strongmen. This pervasive fragmentation might well have persisted indefinitely, potentially consigning Ethiopia to a future as a mere collection of small, independent kingdoms rather than a unified and cohesive empire. However, the advent of the 19th century introduced a fresh wave of formidable external pressures that inexorably compelled the nation to either re-establish its unity or face the imminent peril of conquest by encroaching foreign powers. The momentous opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 dramatically elevated the strategic importance of the Red Sea region for ambitious European powers coinciding with the accelerating momentum of the scramble for Africa. Concurrently, Ethiopia's contiguous territories progressively fell under European dominion one by one. Egypt succumbed to British influence, Sudan became an Anglo-Egyptian condominium, and the Somali seaboard was parceled out among various European colonial ambitions. The imperative for Ethiopia to rapidly modernize its infrastructure and consolidate its fractured realms became unequivocally apparent, lest it face the imminent risk of forfeiting its cherished independence entirely. The pivotal figure destined to orchestrate Ethiopia's resurgence and reunification was Kasa Haile, posthumously revered by history as Emperor Tewodros II. Tewodros was not born into the direct line of imperial succession. He was, rather, the son of a lesser noble from Ethiopia's western reaches. Nevertheless, he was endowed with that rare confluence of magnetic leadership and strategic military genius that occasionally emerges to fundamentally alter the course of historical events. Employing a multifaceted approach that ingeniously blended exceptional martial aptitude, astute political maneuvering, and an indomitable personal resolve, Tewodros successfully subdued the myriad regional potentates and, by the year 1855, had forged a reunified Ethiopia under his singular dominion. Emperor Tewodros II distinguished himself as a visionary modernizer, keenly apprehending the existential necessity for Ethiopia to adapt and evolve in order to endure within the rapidly transforming global landscape. He embarked upon ambitious endeavors, including the establishment of a disciplined, professional military force outfitted with contemporary weaponry, and sought to restructure the venerable Ethiopian Orthodox Church to diminish its extensive political sway. Furthermore, he actively pursued the cultivation of diplomatic ties with European nations, insisting upon interactions founded on principles of mutual respect and parity. His overarching aspiration was to see Ethiopia ascend to a position of genuine equality among the world's sovereign states, a nation neither hermetically sealed in isolation nor held in a state of subordination, but rather dynamically involved with the international community on its own unequivocally defined conditions. Wider world on its own terms. Regrettably, Tewodros's ambitious endeavors towards modernization were significantly impeded by the very disunity he relentlessly strove to overcome. His proposed reforms directly challenged the deeply entrenched traditional power structures that had governed Ethiopia for centuries, inevitably provoking considerable opposition from both the aristocratic nobility and the influential clergy. Furthermore, his aspirations to forge a modern military force demanded substantial resources, which the inherently fragmented empire was barely capable of furnishing. Compounding these internal struggles, his earnest attempts to forge diplomatic ties with European nations regrettably culminated in a series of profound misunderstandings, which would ultimately prove to be the undoing of his reign. Among these diplomatic miscommunications, the most notable involved a crucial letter dispatched by Tewodros to Queen Victoria of Britain in 1862. In this correspondence, the emperor sought to establish formal diplomatic relations and earnestly requested British assistance in advancing Ethiopia's modernization. When the British government inexplicably failed to respond to his overture, a lapse attributed, apparently, to its misplacement within the labyrinthine bureaucratic machinery, arguably constituting the most exorbitantly costly instance of lost mail throughout history, Tewodros interpreted this silence as a profound personal affront. In a dramatic act of reprisal, He ordered the imprisonment of several British subjects, including the British consul himself. What ensued was a bewildering sequence of missteps and blunders that rapidly escalated into a full-scale military expedition. The British government, succumbing to intense public pressure to secure the release of its detained citizens, made the momentous decision to dispatch a military force to Ethiopia. This was no ordinary military undertaking. It evolved into one of the most prodigiously expensive and logistically intricate operations ever conceived in British military annals. The British meticulously assembled a formidable contingent of over 13,000 soldiers, accompanied by a remarkable retinue of elephants, camels, and a prodigious volume of provisions sufficient to sustain a modest urban center, before embarking on an arduous inland march from the Red Sea coast towards Tewodros's formidable mountain stronghold at Magdala. Confronted by this overwhelming and indomitable force, Tewodros found himself increasingly isolated and beleaguered. Many of his own aristocratic nobles, discerning the shifting tides of power and advantage, either deserted his cause or actively colluded with the advancing British forces. As the British contingent drew inexorably closer to Magdala, Tewodros grasped the utter hopelessness of his predicament. Rather than submit to the ignominy of capture and surrender, he made the courageous, albeit tragic, decision to terminate his own life on his own terms. Thus, on April 13th, 1868, amidst the tumultuous storming of his fortress by British forces, Tewodros tragically took his own life with a pistol that had, ironically, been presented to him as a gift by Queen Victoria, a poignant final twist in a narrative replete with sorrowful misunderstandings. Having successfully accomplished their primary objective of liberating their imprisoned compatriots, the British forces subsequently withdrew from Ethiopia, notably refraining from any attempt to establish colonial dominion. This remarkable restraint was not born of philanthropic motives, but rather from pragmatic considerations. The expedition had incurred colossal expenses, and the British harbored no desire to become inextricably entangled in the arduous terrain of the Ethiopian highlands. They departed, however, laden with an extensive collection of Ethiopian manuscripts and invaluable artifacts, including the revered crown of Tewodros, which ultimately found their permanent resting places within British museums, where they continue to reside to this very day, much to the perpetual exasperation of successive Ethiopian governments. The untimely demise of Tewodros plunged Ethiopia once more into a state of profound fragmentation. Nevertheless, his pioneering example had unequivocally demonstrated that the reunification of the empire was indeed an attainable aspiration. The subsequent emperor to undertake this formidable task was Johannes IV, who, by the 1870s, had successfully consolidated his authority across the vast expanse of northern and central Ethiopia. Johannes presented a stark contrast to Tewodros in his approach to governance. He was a more traditional ruler, more inclined to operate within the established power structures, and primarily focused on safeguarding Ethiopia against menacing external threats rather than pursuing extensive internal modernization. Indeed, external threats were extraordinarily prevalent. The momentous inauguration of the Suez Canal had transformed the Red Sea region into a focal point of intense European imperial competition, and Ethiopia consequently found itself encircled by rapidly expanding colonial powers. The Egyptians, bolstered by British support, were relentlessly pushing southward from Sudan. The Italians had firmly established a colonial presence in Eritrea and harbored aspirations of expanding further inland. The French had secured a strategic foothold in Djibouti, while various other European powers keenly surveyed the region, actively seeking opportunities to carve out their own colonial territories. Johannes demonstrated himself to be an exceptionally adept military strategist, successfully repelling numerous invasions and valiantly defending Ethiopia. He decisively vanquished Egyptian forces at the pivotal Battle of Gunde in 1875 and again at Gura in 1876, unequivocally proving that Ethiopian forces, when fighting on their familiar home ground, possessed the capability to contend effectively against modern armies. These victories held immense significance, not solely in military terms, but also psychologically. They shattered the perception of European and Egyptian invincibility and powerfully underscored that Ethiopian independence could be steadfastly preserved through resolute military resistance. However, Johannes's most formidable trial emerged from an wholly unforeseen quarter. In the 1880s, a charismatic religious leader named Muhammad Ahmad proclaimed himself the Mahdi, the divinely guided one, in Sudan, instigating a widespread revolt against Egyptian dominion. The Mahdist movement swiftly gained formidable momentum, and by 1885, Mahdist forces had triumphantly captured Khartoum and established comprehensive control over the majority of Sudan. This dramatic development created a new and perilously hostile neighbor for Ethiopia, a militant Islamic state that inherently perceived the Christian Ethiopian Empire as an intrinsic adversary. The ensuing conflict between Ethiopia and the Mahdist state was simultaneously a fervent religious war and a relentless struggle for regional supremacy. Mahdist forces launched relentless and devastating raids into Ethiopian territory, seizing slaves and livestock, and vigorously propagating their religious doctrine. Johannes was compelled to divert precious resources from other pressing challenges to steadfastly defend his western frontiers against these persistent incursions. In 1889, he personally led a formidable army against a major Mahdist invasion, and tragically, at the Battle of Metemmah, he was killed while gallantly leading a charge against enemy positions. The battlefield demise of Johannes precipitated yet another profound succession crisis. This time, however, the eventual outcome would diverge significantly. The individual who ultimately emerged triumphant from the intense struggle for the imperial throne was Sahle Mariam, who subsequently adopted the regnal name Menelik II. Menelik had previously reigned as the king of Shewa, one of Ethiopia's southern provinces, and he brought to the imperial throne a distinct perspective and an entirely different set of priorities compared to his predecessors. Menelik II would undeniably prove to be one of the most consequential rulers in the annals of Ethiopian history, and indeed, within the broader narrative of African history. He possessed the modernizing zeal of Tewodros, yet he was also an astute pragmatist who keenly understood the paramount importance of operating within existing political frameworks rather than attempting their wholesale overthrow. He exhibited the military prowess of Johannes, but he also recognized that astute diplomacy could be as vital as warfare in safeguarding Ethiopian independence. Most significantly, he was a masterful unifier who succeeded in bringing together the diverse peoples of Ethiopia into a far more cohesive and integrated empire than had existed for centuries. Upon Menelik's ascension to the throne in 1889, Ethiopia remained a sprawling collection of semi-autonomous provinces, tenuously bound together by personal fealty to the emperor and shared religious traditions. By the time of his passing in 1913, he had meticulously forged a modern, centralized state, complete with clearly delineated borders, a formidable professional army, and the essential infrastructure required for a unified nation to effectively function. This monumental transformation was not an instantaneous occurrence, nor was it accomplished without considerable strife, yet it stands as one of the most remarkable state-building achievements in the entirety of African history. Menelik's immediate imperative was to finalize the reunification of Ethiopia, a monumental task initiated by Tewodros and subsequently advanced by Johannes. This entailed bringing the various regional nobles under effective central control, but it also encompassed the expansion of Ethiopian territory to incorporate regions that had never been fully integrated into the empire. Menelik's armies marched resolutely southward and eastward, systematically incorporating the lands of the Oromo, Sidama, Walaita, and other diverse peoples into the burgeoning Ethiopian empire. This significant expansion was occasionally achieved through shrewd negotiation and strategic alliances, but more frequently, it necessitated direct military conquest. The territorial expansion under Menelik roughly doubled the geographical size of the Ethiopian empire, thereby establishing the fundamental territorial boundaries that largely define modern Ethiopia to this very day. This expansion introduced new populations, distinct cultures, and valuable resources into the Ethiopian sphere. However, it simultaneously engendered fresh challenges. The newly incorporated territories possessed their own unique traditions, their own distinct languages, and their own methods of societal organization. Integrating these disparate regions into a unified state demanded a delicate equilibrium of accommodation and assimilation, a challenge that would continue to confront Ethiopian rulers for generations to come. Nevertheless, Menelik's most celebrated accomplishment was his triumphant defense of Ethiopian independence against the encroaching tide of Italian colonial ambitions. The Italians had established a colony in Eritrea during the 1880s and were actively seeking opportunities to expand their nascent African empire. They perceived Ethiopia as a natural and susceptible target, a relatively vulnerable African state ripe for conquest and annexation into their burgeoning colonial possessions. In 1889, they entered into the Treaty of Wuchale with Menelik, a pact which they erroneously believed granted them a protectorate over Ethiopia. Menelik, however, held a fundamentally different interpretation of the treaty's stipulations, and when the Italians commenced acting as if Ethiopia were indeed their protectorate, he resolutely repudiated the treaty and meticulously prepared for war. The ensuing conflict, famously known as the First Italo-Ethiopian War, would subsequently become one of the most profoundly significant events in the entire panorama of African history. The Italian imperial forces, harboring an unwarranted confidence in their advanced technological capabilities and their meticulously organized military apparatus, initiated an invasion of Ethiopia in 1895. Their expeditionary army, numbering approximately 17,000 personnel, comprised both regular Italian troops and indigenous Eritrean colonial levies. They fully anticipated encountering the sort of fragmented and ill-coordinated resistance that European powers had typically subdued across other parts of the African continent, thereby envisioning a swift and effortless triumph. However, what confronted them was an unexpectedly unified and formidable Ethiopian opposition, which utterly confounded their preconceived notions and strategic assumptions. Emperor Menelik II, with profound foresight, had dedicated several years to assiduously preparing for precisely such a confrontation. His preparations included the systematic acquisition of contemporary weaponry, the rigorous training of his fighting forces, and the meticulous cultivation of strategic alliances with influential regional potentates throughout the vast Ethiopian empire. Consequently, when the Italian incursion commenced, he possessed the remarkable capacity to mobilize an army exceeding 100,000 combatants, an unprecedented assembly representing the largest indigenous military force ever marshaled in Africa. This was no mere conglomeration of disparate tribal warriors. Rather, it was a highly disciplined and coherently structured army, thoroughly equipped with state-of-the-art rifles and artillery pieces, and expertly commanded by seasoned officers who possessed a nuanced understanding of both traditional Ethiopian military stratagems and the exigencies of modern warfare. The pivotal moment of this conflict culminated in the Battle of Adwa, a decisive engagement fought on the 1st of March, 1896. General Oreste Baratieri, the Italian commander, had unwisely segmented his forces into 3 distinct columns, endeavoring to execute an intricate flanking maneuver against the entrenched Ethiopian positions. Regrettably for the Italian contingent, their topographical maps proved woefully inaccurate. Their vital communication channels suffered critical breakdowns, and their separated columns became dangerously isolated and acutely susceptible to coordinated Ethiopian assaults. Emperor Menelik, strategically positioned at the epicenter of the Ethiopian battle line, skillfully managed to concentrate his troops against each Italian column sequentially, thereby achieving localized numerical superiority despite being notionally outmatched in overall troop strength. The ensuing outcome was an unmitigated and catastrophic rout for the Italian forces. A grim toll of over 7,000 Italian and Eritrean soldiers perished on the battlefield, with thousands more enduring the ignominy of capture. General Baratieri himself narrowly evaded capture, escaping with his life by the barest margin. Such was the comprehensiveness of the Ethiopian victory that it effectively extinguished Italian colonial aspirations in Ethiopia for the subsequent 4 decades. More significantly, this resounding triumph unequivocally demonstrated to the global community that African armies, when appropriately organized, adequately equipped, and competently led, possessed the undeniable capacity to vanquish European military powers. The reverberations of the Battle of Adwa extended far beyond the geographical confines of Ethiopia. It marked an epochal moment in modern history, being the first instance since antiquity that an African army had achieved such a conclusive triumph over a European colonial power, sending seismic shockwaves across both the African continent and the European heartland. For the myriad peoples of Africa, this victory served as irrefutable proof that the perceived military invincibility of European forces was a myth, thereby catalyzing and invigorating burgeoning resistance movements throughout the continent. Conversely, for the European colonial powers, it necessitated a profound reassessment, compelling them to acknowledge that Africa harbored sophisticated and capable societies fully equipped to defend their sovereignty against external imperialistic designs. The monumental victory achieved at Adwa indelibly secured Ethiopia's unique standing as the solitary African nation, alongside the Republic of Liberia, to successfully safeguard its cherished independence amidst the voracious territorial partitioning known as the Scramble for Africa. This preserved autonomy was far from merely symbolic. It carried profound practical implications that would fundamentally shape Ethiopia's developmental trajectory for many decades to come. While countless other African societies were being systematically dismantled and reconfigured under the oppressive yoke of colonial governance, Ethiopia retained the prerogative to chart its own course, advancing its development in accordance with its inherent national priorities and venerable traditions. Furthermore, in stark contrast to other African economies that were being ruthlessly restructured to exclusively serve the extractive interests of their colonial overlords, Ethiopia steadfastly maintained sovereign control over its invaluable natural resources and its crucial international trade relationships. Capitalizing on the precious period of respite afforded by his decisive triumph at Adwa, Emperor Menelik II vigorously pursued an ambitious agenda of national modernization. He spearheaded the establishment of Ethiopia's inaugural modern educational institutions, oversaw the construction of the nation's first contemporary hospitals, and initiated the monumental undertaking of a railway line designed to connect the burgeoning capital with the distant coast. Moreover, he strategically relocated the imperial seat of government from the historic city of Gondar to Addis Ababa, a brand new metropolis he personally founded in the central highlands. The name Addis Ababa, translating to new flower in the Amharic language, was chosen to symbolically embody the regeneration and progressive modernization of the Ethiopian Empire. The selection of this particular location was profoundly strategic. Addis Ababa's central geographical position within the newly expanded empire rendered it significantly more efficient for the effective governance and administration of the diverse territories that Menelik had successfully brought under unified Ethiopian dominion. The establishment of Addis Ababa as the burgeoning new capital transcended a mere administrative decree. It served as a powerful declaration regarding the progressive vision Emperor Menelik harbored for the future character of Ethiopia. Unlike its predecessor, Gondar, which was deeply steeped in medieval traditions and visually dominated by ancient palatial structures, Addis Ababa was meticulously conceived and designed from its very foundations as a forward-looking, modern urban center. Its layout featured expansive boulevards expressly engineered to accommodate the emerging technology of automobiles, contemporary buildings constructed utilizing imported materials, and a robust infrastructure meticulously planned to support a rapidly expanding population and a dynamic, growing economy. Emperor Menelik also possessed a profound understanding that genuine modernization demanded more than just the erection of new edifices and the adoption of advanced technologies. It necessitated the cultivation of novel ideas and the embrace of progressive modes of thought. To this end, he proactively dispatched promising Ethiopian students abroad to pursue higher education in distinguished European universities, ensuring they would return imbued with contemporary knowledge in fields such as modern science, medicine, and public administration. He judiciously invited foreign advisors to assist in the establishment of modern state institutions. Yet, unlike his predecessors, he exercised meticulous vigilance to ensure that Ethiopian sovereignty and control were consistently maintained over these critical relationships. The foreign experts who arrived in Ethiopia during Menelik's enlightened reign came strictly as employees and consultants, explicitly not as colonial administrators or evangelical missionaries intent on fundamentally reshaping Ethiopian society according to external dictates. Among Emperor Menelek's most profoundly impactful innovations was the establishment of a sophisticated modern postal system and an extensive telegraph network. While this might initially appear to be a relatively minor administrative detail, in a nation as vast and ethnically diverse as Ethiopia, efficient communication was absolutely indispensable for maintaining national unity and asserting central governmental control. The newfound capability to transmit messages rapidly across the expansive empire empowered Menelik to effectively coordinate military operations, respond promptly to localized crises, and maintain continuous contact with his regional governors. Furthermore, it significantly facilitated the expansion of trade and commerce, enabling merchants to seamlessly coordinate their diverse activities across immense geographical distances. The telegraph system, in particular, connected Ethiopia to the wider global community in ways that had been utterly unattainable during its previous period of relative isolation. Ethiopian officials could now engage in direct communication with their counterparts in other nations, thereby streamlining diplomatic relations and fostering international trade agreements. Crucially, news from around the world could reach Addis Ababa within days rather than months, allowing Ethiopian leaders to remain comprehensively informed about international developments that held potential implications for their beloved country. However, perhaps Emperor Menelek's most enduring and transformative contribution to Ethiopia's long-term development was his pioneering establishment of a modern, comprehensive educational system. Traditional Ethiopian education had historically been predominantly controlled by the venerable Orthodox Church, which, while providing an exceptional grounding in religious subjects, offered only limited exposure to modern scientific principles and technological advancements. Menelik bravely inaugurated secular schools that incorporated subjects such as mathematics, science, geography, and modern languages alongside the established traditional curricula. He also continued to dispatch promising students abroad for advanced education, thereby cultivating a vital cadre of Ethiopian intellectuals poised to contribute significantly to the nation's ongoing modernization. The creation of these modern schools was not solely focused on imparting practical skills. It was fundamentally aimed at forging a new, dynamic Ethiopian identity. Students within Menelek's progressive schools learned about Ethiopia's rich history and vibrant culture, but they were simultaneously educated about the broader global context and Ethiopia's evolving place within it. They diligently studied the great civilizations of the past and the contemporary nations of the present, thereby developing a profound sense of pride in Ethiopian achievements, while simultaneously grasping the complex challenges and promising opportunities presented by the modern world. Emperor Menelek's reign also witnessed a period of significant and concerted economic development. The sagacious emperor actively encouraged the burgeoning of new industries, vigorously promoted the expansion of trade networks, and diligently championed the improvement of agricultural techniques across the empire. He presided over the establishment of Ethiopia's first modern banking institutions, a crucial step that significantly facilitated commerce and stimulated domestic and international investment. Moreover, he initiated an ambitious program for the construction of roads and bridges, infrastructure vital for enhancing transportation, efficiency, and communication fluidity throughout the vast imperial domain. The renowned railway line connecting Djibouti to Addis Ababa, a monumental undertaking commenced during Menelek's visionary reign, stood as a particular source of national pride. It represented one of the most audacious and complex engineering projects ever conceived and executed on the African continent, and its completion dramatically reduced both the transit time and the exorbitant cost associated with transporting goods between the fertile Ethiopian highlands and the crucial seaports. The railway project, however, was not devoid of its share of controversies and intricate complications. Its construction was primarily financed by French investors and meticulously engineered by French experts, leading to understandable concerns within Ethiopia regarding potential undue foreign influence in internal national affairs. Furthermore, formidable technical challenges arose as the railway line had to traverse exceptionally difficult terrain, including treacherous deep gorges and formidable high mountain passes. Consequently, construction proceeded at a slow and arduous pace, proved exceedingly expensive, and was frequently marred by protracted disputes between the Ethiopian government, the French construction company, and various international creditors. At one critical juncture, the entire ambitious project teetered on the brink of complete collapse due to severe financial exigencies. Nevertheless, Emperor Menelik steadfastly persevered with the ambitious railway project, for he possessed an acute understanding of its profound strategic importance for the nation. The railway would furnish Ethiopia with reliable and independent access to the sea, thereby significantly reducing the country's historical dependence on potentially hostile neighboring states for its vital trade routes. It would also dramatically facilitate the rapid movement of troops and essential supplies, thereby substantially strengthening the central government's capacity to maintain effective control over distant and diverse provinces. Most importantly, its successful completion would unequivocally demonstrate to the international community that Ethiopia was indeed a modern, capable nation, fully equipped to undertake and successfully execute major infrastructure projects of global significance. The eventual completion of the railway line to Addis Ababa in 1917, a mere 4 years after Emperor Menelik's passing, marked a profoundly symbolic conclusion to Ethiopia's protracted period of isolation and heralded the dawn of its full and dynamic engagement with the modern world. Ethiopian goods could now reach international markets with unprecedented speed and efficiency, while foreign products and innovative ideas could flow into Ethiopia far more easily than ever before. The magnificent railway station in Addis Ababa thus became an enduring symbol of Ethiopian modernity and progressive advancement, a tangible and concrete manifestation that this ancient African empire possessed the remarkable capacity to adapt, innovate, and thrive within the challenging landscape of the 20th century. Nevertheless, Emperor Menelik's ambitious endeavors towards national modernization encountered significant obstacles and vocal detractors. Hereditary nobles expressed profound concern that the centralizing tendencies of his administration would diminish their established authority and independence within their respective domains. Concurrently, influential religious leaders harbored anxieties that the proliferation of secular education and the influx of foreign cultural influences might erode the very foundations of Ethiopian Orthodox traditions, thereby threatening the spiritual fabric of the nation. Furthermore, various regional peoples who had been integrated into the expanding empire through military conquest frequently harbored deep-seated grievances against the enforcement of central authority and the pervasive spread of Amharic culture. Navigating these multifaceted tensions demanded the full extent of Menelik's remarkable diplomatic acumen and strategic foresight. A paramount challenge confronting Menelik was the critical issue of imperial succession. The venerable emperor possessed no surviving male progeny, and the established Ethiopian tradition remained largely unclear regarding the protocol for female ascendancy to the throne. This inherent ambiguity engendered considerable apprehension and instability concerning the future trajectory of the dynasty and the uninterrupted progression of Menelik's far-reaching modernization policies. Ultimately, the emperor designated his grandson, Lige Iyasu, as his chosen heir, a decision that would subsequently demonstrate itself to be fraught with difficulties. Lige Iyasu, who ascended to the imperial throne in 1913 following the demise of Menelik, was a youthful sovereign whose perspectives diverged markedly from those of his distinguished grandfather, whereas Emperor Menelik had remained circumspect regarding external cultural penetration while simultaneously advocating for progress. Iyasu exhibited a greater propensity to embark upon sweeping, transformative reforms. Most contentiously, he began to demonstrate an overt affinity for Islamic customs and beliefs, actively seeking to foster strategic alliances with Muslim leaders, both within Ethiopia's borders and in neighboring territories. This perceived shift was widely interpreted as a profound dereliction of the nation's deeply ingrained Christian heritage and provoked widespread consternation among the powerful nobility and the revered clergy. The precarious situation was further exacerbated by the commencement of World War I and global conflict that presented Ethiopia with both novel pressures and unprecedented opportunities. The monumental war placed the formidable European imperialist nations in direct opposition to one another, thereby potentially creating avenues for Ethiopia to augment its regional sway or reclaim land previously ceded due to colonial expansion. However, this volatile landscape also presented inherent risks. Aligning with the incorrect faction in the escalating conflict could lead to catastrophic repercussions for Ethiopian independence. Iyasu's unmistakable inclination towards the Ottoman Empire and the Central Powers, exacerbated by his contentious religious policies, precipitated a profound crisis of legitimacy in his leadership. Consequently, in 1916, a powerful coalition comprising influential nobles, revered clergy, and senior military commanders orchestrated a swift and decisive overthrow, deposing him and subsequently enthroning Menelik's daughter, Zewdetu, as empress. This represented a momentous and groundbreaking occurrence. Ethiopia thus became one of the inaugural nations globally to appoint a female head of state in the contemporary era. Nevertheless, the true levers of power were effectively wielded by the influential regent, Ras Tafari Makonnen, a figure who would later ascend to become Emperor Haile Selassie I. The regency of Ras Tafari heralded the commencement of a distinct epoch in Ethiopian history. Tafari emerged as a progressive reformer, echoing the visionary legacy of Menelik II. Yet he also distinguished himself by possessing a more global outlook and demonstrating a greater readiness to interact with the broader international community. He keenly comprehended that Ethiopia's enduring independence would necessitate not merely formidable martial prowess, but equally astute statecraft and global acknowledgement. Therefore, he embarked upon the ambitious task of positioning Ethiopia as a respected member of the international community, actively pursuing affiliation with international organizations and forging robust diplomatic ties with major world powers. Among Ras Tafari's foremost diplomatic undertakings was his successful facilitation of Ethiopia's entry into the League of Nations in 1923. This represented a monumental triumph. Ethiopia earned the distinction of becoming the pioneering African nation to gain accession to the League, and its membership served as an unequivocal affirmation of its standing as an autonomous state on the global stage. Nevertheless, this admission did not transpire without considerable contention. Some European member states openly expressed reservations regarding the perceived level of civilization of an African nation, questioning its suitability for such an esteemed body. However, Tafari's astute diplomatic skills and Ethiopia's demonstrable capacity for effective self-governance ultimately prevailed. Ethiopia's inclusion in the League of Nations transcended mere symbolic significance. It furnished the country with a crucial platform for global statecraft and offered a prospective avenue for collective assistance in the event of external threats. Tafari keenly understood that in a progressively globalized environment, isolation ceased to be a tenable approach for maintaining national independence. Ethiopia fundamentally needed to integrate itself into the international system if it was to effectively safeguard its interests against impending adversities. Ras Tafari also sustained the momentum of Menelik's progressive modernization initiatives, yet he did so by accentuating global participation to an unprecedented degree. He undertook numerous extensive journeys, thereby becoming the inaugural Ethiopian monarch to embark on tours of Europe and other far-flung regions of the world. These voyages transcended mere official diplomatic assignments. They served as invaluable educational expeditions. Tafari diligently observed contemporary governmental structures, technological advancements, and administrative methodologies, meticulously gathering insights and bringing back ideas that could be judiciously tailored for application within the Ethiopian context. Furthermore, the regent's travels played a crucial role in shaping public perception. By presenting himself on global platforms as an eloquent, learned, and refined statesman, Tafari effectively subverted prevalent European prejudices concerning African rulers and unequivocally showcased Ethiopia as a contemporary state worthy of profound esteem and international acknowledgement. His prominent appearances at international conferences and his personal meetings with world leaders significantly helped to solidify Ethiopia's standing as an influential participant in international affairs. In 1930, subsequent to the demise of Empress Zewditu, Ras Tafari was solemnly enthroned as Emperor Haile Selassie I. The coronation itself proved to be a magnificent and globally observed spectacle that garnered widespread international scrutiny, eloquently showcasing Ethiopia's considerable prosperity, refined character, and profound cultural heritage. Dignitaries and envoys from across the globe converged to witness the elaborate ceremony, which was meticulously executed in strict adherence to time-honored Ethiopian customs, but also judiciously integrated contemporary components that underscored the nation's active participation in the modern world. The name Haile Selassie translates to Might of the Trinity, symbolizing the newly crowned emperor's profound spiritual devotion and his perception of his sacred duty as the guardian of Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity. Yet, Haile Selassie was simultaneously a visionary reformer who grasped the harmonious potential for coexistence between established heritage and forward-looking advancement. His elaborate coronation ceremony thus deliberately incorporated both ancient rituals that linked him inextricably to the venerable lineage of Ethiopian monarchs and modern elements that affirmed Ethiopia's rightful position within the contemporary global order. Haile Selassie's initial years as emperor were characterized by sustained endeavors in both national modernization and heightened international engagement. In 1931, he notably issued Ethiopia's inaugural codified constitution, thereby erecting a foundational structure for a modern governmental system, while simultaneously retaining the fundamental characteristics of the imperial framework. This constitution instituted a legislative assembly, enshrined fundamental entitlements for the populace, and stipulated provisions for an updated judicial framework. Yet critically, it also upheld the monarch's pivotal position within Ethiopian governance. The new constitution represented a meticulous equilibrium between established tradition and progressive modernity. It formally recognized the emperor as the ultimate sovereign power in Ethiopia, thus maintaining the hereditary foundation of Ethiopian statecraft. But it concurrently established institutions and procedures that embodied contemporary tenets of administration. The parliament, though circumscribed in its authority, provided a valuable platform for deliberating national issues and served as an avenue for integrating varied perspectives into the political process. Haile Selassie also persisted in broadening access to contemporary schooling, actively founding additional educational institutions and dispatching a greater number of scholars overseas for advanced training. He deeply understood that Ethiopia's enduring national advancement would be contingent upon cultivating an enlightened citizenry proficient in overseeing modern institutions and technologies. The emperor himself was an ardent proponent of intellectual enlightenment, frequently visiting schools and personally urging pupils to apply themselves assiduously to their academic pursuits. However, the paramount threat to Haile Selassie's early reign emanated from an unforeseen quarter: the resurgence of Italian imperialistic aspirations. Benito Mussolini, who had ascended to leadership in Italy in 1922, was resolute in his objective to rekindle Italian national pride and to forge a modern imperium reminiscent of ancient Rome. The ignominious rout at Adwa in 1896 continued to fester in the collective Italian consciousness, and Mussolini envisioned the subjugation of Ethiopia as a means to both exact retribution for that historic humiliation and unequivocally showcase Italian martial might. The strategic arrangements for a renewed military incursion into Ethiopia commenced in the nascent years of the 1930s. Mussolini systematically amassed considerable Italian military contingents in Eritrea and Italian Somaliland, the two colonial territories bordering Ethiopia, and began accumulating vast arsenals and logistical provisions for what was clearly intended to be a large-scale military offensive. Concurrently, the Italians initiated an orchestrated disinformation effort intended to legitimize their impending aggression, depicting Ethiopia as a savage and undeveloped nation that required benevolent European tutelage for its inherent betterment. Emperor Haile Selassie was acutely cognizant of the burgeoning Italian preparations and consequently exerted every possible effort to ready Ethiopia for the impending conflict. He assiduously endeavored to update and strengthen the Ethiopian armed forces, procuring armaments from abroad and educating military personnel in contemporary tactical techniques. Furthermore, he tirelessly petitioned for global assistance, imploring the League of Nations and other influential global entities to aid in safeguarding Ethiopian sovereignty. Regrettably, the global reaction, proved to be tepid at best. The majority of European powers were predominantly preoccupied with the burgeoning menace posed by Nazi Germany rather than with Italian expansionist designs on the African continent. The commencement of the Second Italo-Ethiopian War occurred in October 1935, when Italian forces launched a comprehensive invasion of Ethiopia from their colonial strongholds of Eritrea and Italian Somaliland. This time, the Italians were far more meticulously equipped and organized than during their previous attempt in 1896. They boasted superior numerical strength, advanced material, and highly refined logistical capabilities. Most critically, they possessed formidable aerial supremacy. Italian aircraft could conduct devastating aerial bombardments against Ethiopian emplacements and vital logistical routes, thereby affording the invading forces an overwhelming strategic superiority over the defending armies. The Ethiopian nation's defensive efforts were severely impeded by a confluence of challenges, many of which had been absent during the preceding Italian incursion. The country itself exhibited a diminished cohesion compared to the era of Emperor Menelik II, with certain provincial magnates choosing a path of non-intervention, or in some instances, actively aligning themselves with the invading Italian forces. The Ethiopian military, while numerically superior to its 1896 predecessor, remained largely equipped with antiquated armaments and critically deficient in the sophisticated aerial capabilities and formidable heavy artillery that characterized the Italian war machine. Most profoundly, Ethiopia stood in stark isolation on the global stage. Unlike the earlier conflict, when the nation had been able to procure defensive material without impediment, a restrictive arms embargo, unilaterally imposed by the League of Nations, disproportionately crippled Ethiopia's ability to acquire essential weaponry, while Italy, a more industrially developed nation, was far less impacted. Despite these formidable disadvantages, Ethiopian forces mounted a valiant and tenacious opposition to the Italian invasion. The rugged, undulating topography of Ethiopia inherently conferred a strategic advantage upon its defenders, and Ethiopian soldiers fought with an unyielding bravery and resolute spirit, reminiscent of the historic triumph at Adwa. For several months, the ultimate trajectory of the conflict hung precariously in the balance, with Ethiopian forces achieving several significant tactical victories against advancing Italian formations. However, the Italian deployment of chemical agents, in flagrant violation of established international humanitarian laws, began to irrevocably alter the strategic equilibrium of the war. Italian aircraft unleashed devastating payloads of mustard gas upon Ethiopian positions, inflicting ghastly casualties and profoundly eroding the morale of the Ethiopian combatants. The use of chemical weapons proved exceptionally devastating when deployed against the largely unmechanized Ethiopian cavalry units and the indigenous traditional warriors, who were utterly devoid of any protective apparatus. Global condemnations and remonstrations regarding this egregious violation of humanitarian protocols proved largely ineffectual, and the Italians persisted in their deployment of these abhorrent armaments throughout the entire campaign. By the early months of 1936, it became painfully evident that the fabric of Ethiopian resistance was inexorably unraveling. Italian forces were making inexorable headway across myriad battlefronts, and Ethiopian armies were being systematically vanquished in piecemeal engagements. In May 1936, Italian forces marched triumphantly into the capital city, Addis Ababa, and Benito Mussolini grandiloquently declared the formal establishment of Italian East Africa, a new colonial entity forged from the amalgamation of Ethiopia with the pre-existing Italian territories of Eritrea and Italian Somaliland. Emperor Haile Selassie confronted with the utter disintegration of any semblance of organized national defense, made the agonizing resolution to embark upon a path of political expatriation, preferring exile over the futility of an utterly unwinnable conflict. On May 2nd, 1936, he departed from Ethiopia and eventually found sanctuary in Great Britain, where he would diligently campaign for the eventual restoration of Ethiopia's sovereign autonomy over the subsequent 5 years. This strategic withdrawal, however, was not without its detractors and generated considerable debate. Some segments of the Ethiopian populace believed the monarch ought to have remained within the nation's borders to personally spearhead a protracted guerrilla insurgency. His Imperial Majesty, however, sagaciously surmised that his continued existence and advocacy from abroad held far greater strategic utility than his inevitable capture or martyrdom within the beleaguered homeland. The Emperor's appearance before the esteemed League of Nations in Geneva in June 1936 became one of the most poignant and indelible episodes in the organization's history. Speaking in Amharic, with his profound words meticulously translated into both French and English, Haile Selassie delivered a fervent and eloquent supplication for concerted international intervention to restore Ethiopian independence. His address was punctuated by boisterous heckling and disruptive interjections from Italian journalists and fervent fascist partisans. But the emperor, with an unwavering composure, steadfastly maintained his regal decorum and continued his impassioned appeal for justice. I, Haile Selassie, Emperor of Ethiopia, am here today to claim that justice which is due to my people and the assistance promised to it 8 months ago when 50 nations asserted that aggression had been committed in violation of international treaties, the emperor declared with solemn gravity. His powerful utterances reverberated across the global consciousness, and his unshakable dignity amidst such overt fascist provocation cemented his status as an enduring emblem of defiance against unprovoked aggression and a staunch advocate for the principles of international jurisprudence. Yet, the esteemed League of Nations, despite its lofty pronouncements regarding collective security and the sanctity of international statutes, ultimately demonstrated either an incapacity or an unwillingness to enact substantive measures to reinstate Ethiopian independence. The economic punitive measures levied against Italy were notoriously tepid in their application and ultimately proved utterly ineffectual in deterring the aggressor. Furthermore, no military intervention was ever contemplated or executed to forcibly nullify the Italian subjugation. This profound and conspicuous dereliction of duty by the League of Nations in safeguarding Ethiopia's sovereignty stands as a pivotal contributing element in its ultimate demise and subsequent supersession by the United Nations in the aftermath of the Second World War. Meanwhile, within Ethiopia itself, Italian rule unquestionably proved to be draconian and rapacious. The Italians meticulously endeavored to reconfigure Ethiopia into a quintessential colonial dominion, systematically siphoning its abundant natural endowments for the sole aggrandizement of the mother country, and forcibly superimposing alien European cultural paradigms and administrative frameworks upon the indigenous Ethiopian populace. While various infrastructural developments, such as roadways, were indeed constructed, their fundamental purpose was to expedite the facile extraction of Ethiopian resources, rather than to confer genuine advantages upon the local inhabitants. The Italian colonial administration also embarked upon a deliberate campaign to dismantle and obliterate established Ethiopian cultural and political structures. The Italians prohibited the utilization of Amharic, the national language, in schools and government, vigorously championed the propagation of Italian linguistic and cultural norms, and actively sought to enfeeble and subvert the deeply entrenched Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. Furthermore, they instituted a series of discriminatory racial statutes, disturbingly analogous to those then prevalent in Nazi Germany, thereby fabricating a rigid social stratification that unequivocally positioned Italians at the apex, individuals of mixed heritage in an intermediate stratum, and the indigenous Ethiopians at the very nadir of this oppressive social order. However, Italian dominion in Ethiopia never achieved complete or undisputed consolidation. A persistent and indomitable spirit of defiance permeated the entire duration of the foreign occupation, with courageous Ethiopian patriots engaging in a sustained campaign of irregular warfare, targeting both the Italian military apparatus and those indigenous elements who chose to collaborate with the invaders. This insurgency proved especially potent and enduring within the rugged, elevated terrains of the nation, where the time-honored Ethiopian military strategies and knowledge of the local topography afforded a distinct advantage against the more conventional, mechanized forces of the colonial power. The resistance was led by a diverse and resolute pantheon of leaders, including venerable traditional aristocrats who had steadfastly maintained their allegiance to Emperor Haile Selassie, influential ecclesiastical figures who vehemently resisted the Italian efforts to erode the foundations of Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity, and charismatic local chieftains who galvanized their respective communities into sustained opposition against the foreign occupiers. Among these formidable figures, Abebe Aragai emerged as one of the most celebrated. He masterminded intricate guerrilla operations throughout the strategically vital Shewa region, earning him the revered appellation, the Lion of Judah's Defender, Kaikesem. Equally iconic was Balcha Safo, an octogenarian general who had previously distinguished himself in the service of Emperor Menelik II, and who, with unyielding resolve, vehemently repudiated Italian suzerainty despite his advanced years. The resistance transcended mere armed confrontation. It manifested also as a profound cultural and spiritual bulwark. Clerics of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church clandestinely persevered in performing sacred rites within concealed sanctuaries, thus safeguarding the venerable religious customs and doctrines that the Italian regime sought assiduously to eradicate. Dedicated Ethiopian pedagogues covertly instructed children in the Amharic tongue, thereby preserving the linguistic heritage and literary canon that formed the very bedrock of Ethiopian national identity. Indigenous artists and troubadours ingeniously crafted creative expressions that not only lauded Ethiopia's rich historical tapestry and vibrant cultural patrimony, but also subtly yet trenchantly satirized the pompous colonial aspirations of the Italians. The Italian occupation also encountered a multitude of pragmatic impediments that severely hampered the establishment of truly effective dominion. Ethiopia's vast geographical expanse, characterized by its formidable topography and rudimentary communication networks, rendered it exceedingly arduous for Italian military units to exert and sustain authoritative control over the country's numerous isolated regions. The Italian colonial administrative apparatus itself was perpetually plagued by a chronic dearth of personnel and insufficient financial allocations, compelling it to disproportionately depend upon indigenous collaborators whose loyalty and efficacy often proved tenuous and inconsistent. Crucially, the Italian occupiers utterly failed to cultivate any genuine allegiance or affection among the Ethiopian populace, who, with unwavering conviction, persisted in perceiving them as nothing more than unwelcome foreign aggressors, rather than as legitimate or rightful sovereigns. The geopolitical landscape underwent a profound metamorphosis with the global eruption of the Second World War in 1939. Initially, Italy's formal belligerence, aligning itself with Nazi Germany, appeared to fortify the Italian strategic foothold within East Africa, as it presented Mussolini's expeditionary forces with an opportune moment to launch assaults upon British colonial territories in both Sudan and Kenya. The Italian military enjoyed a period of initial triumphs, successfully seizing British Somaliland and making considerable incursions into the contiguous regions of Sudan and Kenya. Nevertheless, the counteraction mounted by the British Empire proved both prompt and resolute. Acknowledging the critical geopolitical significance of the Red Sea littoral and the palpable menace that Italian East Africa represented to the vital British maritime lifelines connecting with India and the Far East, the British command meticulously marshaled a formidable expeditionary contingent with the express objective of reclaiming the territory. Of paramount significance for the Ethiopian cause, the British government formally acknowledged Haile Selassie as the rightful sovereign of Ethiopia and pledged their unequivocal support for his eventual reinstatement to the imperial throne. Thus, in January 1941, His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie re-entered his homeland, integrated within a broader British military campaign expressly designed to emancipate the nation from the yoke of Italian occupation. The triumphant reappearance of the emperor carried immense dual significance, both symbolically potent and practically instrumental. It served as an immediate and powerful nexus around which the disparate threads of Ethiopian resistance could coalesce, simultaneously signaling an unwavering British resolve to facilitate the restoration of Ethiopia's rightful sovereignty. The mere spectacle of their revered emperor, once more treading Ethiopian earth after half a decade of arduous exile, profoundly galvanized the spirits of Ethiopian patriots and ignited a widespread and fervent popular insurgency against the entrenched Italian colonial administration. The ensuing campaign for liberation unfolded with extraordinary celerity and achieved resounding success. A combined force of British and Commonwealth contingents, bolstered by the unwavering resolve of Ethiopian patriots and elements of the Free French forces operating from Djibouti, launched a coordinated offensive, pressing forward simultaneously across numerous axes against the beleaguered Italian strongholds. The Italian forces, isolated from any prospect of external replenishment and confronted by an increasingly hostile indigenous populace throughout their occupied domains, found themselves utterly incapable of mounting any coherent or efficacious defense. By the advent of April 1941, British military units had successfully secured the capital, Addis Ababa, signaling the comprehensive disintegration of Italian resistance across the entirety of Ethiopia. On the auspicious date of May 5, 1941, precisely half a decade to the day since his reluctant departure, Emperor Haile Selassie made a glorious and triumphant re-entry into Addis Ababa. This specific date was not arbitrary, but rather meticulously selected, as it marked the exact 5-year anniversary of the Italian forces' initial subjugation of the capital city. His Imperial Majesty's return on this particular day served as a potent and unequivocal symbol of the total abrogation and complete reversal of the Italian conquest. Jubilant throngs of citizens lined the thoroughfares, offering an ecstatic welcome to their repatriated emperor, and the ensuing celebrations resonated with fervent national pride for many days thereafter. The joyous festivities of liberation persisted for several days, echoing through the land with profound significance. Beyond a mere triumph of arms, the re-establishment of Ethiopian sovereignty represented a profound affirmation of global legal tenets and the concept of shared security. These vital principles had suffered severe erosion due to the League of Nations' regrettable inability to safeguard Ethiopia from invasion between 1935 and 1936. Remarkably, Ethiopia achieved the distinction of being the inaugural nation among those subjugated by the Axis powers to regain its full autonomy, thereby elevating Emperor Haile Selassie into an enduring emblem of defiance against the brutal onslaught of fascist expansionism. Nevertheless, the hard-won freedom of Ethiopia simultaneously ushered in a fresh array of formidable challenges and intricate complications. The nation lay prostrate, ravaged by half a decade of relentless conflict and foreign occupation, its essential infrastructure largely demolished, and its economic fabric severely dislocated. While the departing Italian colonial administration bequeathed a complex inheritance of newly constructed roadways and edifices, it also left an indelible mark of profound societal upheaval and cultural detriment. Crucially, the crucible of occupation and the subsequent resistance movement had irrevocably altered the very fabric of Ethiopian society, setting in motion transformations destined to exert enduring consequences. Furthermore, the protracted conflict had undeniably bolstered the stature of prominent regional potentates and courageous resistance commanders who had valiantly opposed the Italian invaders. These individuals had amassed invaluable military expertise, significant political leverage, and widespread popular endorsement throughout the period of occupation, and they naturally anticipated commensurate recompense for their unwavering allegiance and dedicated service. Navigating these burgeoning expectations, while simultaneously endeavoring to re-establish a robust central authority, would emerge as one of Emperor Haile Selassie's paramount tasks in the immediate aftermath of the war. Additionally, the venerable emperor found himself compelled to contend with the profoundly altered global landscape forged in the crucible of World War II. The venerable European colonial hegemonies were visibly commencing their inevitable decline, concurrently with the ascent of novel global titans, specifically the United States and the Soviet Union, poised to exert unparalleled dominance over international relations. In this nascent global configuration, Ethiopia was faced with the imperative of skillfully traversing this intricate new international milieu, all the while steadfastly preserving its hard-won sovereignty and assiduously pursuing its national aspirations for progress and advancement. Emperor Haile Selassie demonstrated an extraordinary aptitude for international statecraft in the unfolding post-war epoch. He shrewdly positioned Ethiopia in alignment with the Western Allied powers, yet concurrently cultivated amiable diplomatic ties with the Soviet Union and various other communist nations. His sagacity was further evidenced by his role as one of the pivotal founding signatories of the United Nations Charter in 1945, a move that ensured Ethiopia's robust and engaged participation in a multitude of international bodies and significant global assemblies. The astute monarch profoundly comprehended that within this emergent global paradigm, smaller sovereign states were obliged to forge alliances and collaborate assiduously to safeguard their collective interests from the overwhelming influence of the burgeoning superpowers. Among Haile Selassie's most significant contributions to global affairs was his instrumental involvement in the conceptualization and establishment of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in 1963. The Venerable Emperor had consistently championed the ideals of Pan-African solidarity and self-determination for the continent's nations. Perceiving the OAU as a crucial instrument to advance these noble objectives, while simultaneously augmenting Ethiopia's diplomatic leverage and prestige within continental discourse. The consequential decision to situate the permanent headquarters of the OAU in Addis Ababa served as a profound acknowledgement of Ethiopia's unparalleled status as one of only two African nations, alongside Liberia, that had steadfastly preserved its sovereign autonomy throughout the entire era of colonial subjugation. The Emperor's profoundly influential address, delivered to the United Nations General Assembly in 1963, ascended to the ranks of the most unforgettable pronouncements ever uttered within the annals of the esteemed international body. During this momentous occasion, he famously proclaimed, with prophetic clarity, that, until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned. Everywhere is war. A powerful declaration whose echoes reverberated far beyond the hallowed chambers of the UN edifice in New York City. This seminal oration would subsequently serve as the profound wellspring of inspiration for Bob Marley's iconic anthem, War, thereby disseminating Haile Selassie's potent message to an expansive global listenership and firmly solidifying his enduring reputation as a paramount symbol of steadfast opposition to tyranny and systemic injustice. Yet, even as Haile Selassie garnered burgeoning international plaudits as a sagacious statesman and an ardent champion for the self-determination of African nations, the internal dynamics within Ethiopia were simultaneously growing progressively intricate. The emperor's ambitious initiatives for national modernization, which had experienced an abrupt hiatus due to the Italian occupation, recommenced with invigorated zeal following the country's emancipation. A flurry of developmental activities ensued. Numerous new educational institutions were erected, vital healthcare facilities were established, and extensive infrastructural undertakings were set into motion. Furthermore, the emperor embarked upon the implementation of significant agrarian reforms and crucial administrative adjustments, all meticulously conceived to propel Ethiopian society and its governmental apparatus into a more contemporary era. Nevertheless, these transformative reforms inadvertently engendered considerable friction and latent anxieties within the diverse strata of Ethiopian society. The entrenched traditional nobility expressed profound apprehension that the relentless march of modernization would inevitably erode their inherited authority and cherished prerogatives. Concurrently, powerful regional chieftains, who had significantly augmented their influence and standing during the arduous period of resistance, harbored deep resentment towards any endeavors aimed at re-establishing robust central governmental oversight. Meanwhile, the burgeoning cohort of younger, intellectually cultivated Ethiopians grew increasingly restive with the perceived sluggishness of progress, prompting them to critically evaluate whether the venerable imperial system possessed the inherent capacity to effectuate the swift and comprehensive national advancement that the burgeoning nation so desperately required. The abortive coup d'état of 1960 signaled a pivotal juncture in the extensive reign of Haile Selassie, and by extension, within the broader tapestry of Ethiopian history. During a period when the revered emperor was undertaking an official state visit to Brazil, a clandestine faction comprising disgruntled military officers and progressive intellectuals, under the leadership of the formidable commander of the Imperial Guard, made an audacious bid to unseat the existing government. Their aim was to enthrone the emperor's son, Crown Prince Asfaw Wasson, as a constitutional monarch, thereby ushering in a new political order. The instigators of the coup vociferously declared their overarching ambition to expedite the modernization of Ethiopia and to curtail the entrenched power of the traditional aristocratic classes. Although the coup attempt ultimately collapsed, after 4 intense days of localized combat within the capital city of Addis Ababa, it starkly illuminated the profound undercurrents of discontent regarding the sluggish tempo of reform and underscored the increasing sway wielded by the nation's educated, progressively minded segments. The emperor's subsequent reaction was notably temperate and strategically calculated. He extended clemency to the majority of the conspirators, and paradoxically, even accelerated certain aspects of his previously outlined reform agendas. Nonetheless, this unsettling episode undeniably rendered him more circumspect concerning the trajectory of political evolution and instilled a heightened sense of vigilance towards any nascent threats to his imperial prerogatives. The decade of the 1960s and the nascent years of the 1970s witnessed a sustained trajectory of economic and social advancement across Ethiopia, yet this progress was simultaneously accompanied by an escalation of underlying political frictions. During this era, the emperor oversaw the establishment of novel institutions of higher learning, significantly broadened the national educational framework, and actively championed the expansion of industrial sectors. Ethiopia consequently emerged as a preeminent regional force in the realm of aviation, with its national flag carrier, Ethiopian Airlines, ascending to the status of one of the African continent's most prosperous and reputable air transport providers. The nation also solidified its position as a substantial global purveyor of coffee, with the distinctive quality and aromatic essence of Ethiopian coffee garnering widespread international acclaim within competitive markets. However, these notable accomplishments were regrettably overshadowed by an accumulating array of societal dilemmas that the imperial administration appeared either incapable or disinclined to tackle with requisite efficacy. The vexing issue of land tenure persisted as a paramount concern, with the vast majority of Ethiopian agriculturalists continuing their arduous existence as tenant farmers on estates predominantly held by the aristocracy or ecclesiastical institutions. Concurrently, urban centers experienced a discernible surge in unemployment rates as younger generations migrated en masse to cities, driven by the elusive promise of opportunities that frequently failed to materialize. Moreover, disparities between regions became increasingly pronounced, with certain localities reaping the benefits of developmental initiatives, while others languished in continued marginalization. The most formidable and enduring predicament arose from the northern province of Eritrea, a territory that had been formally confederated with Ethiopia in 1952 through a specific United Nations mandate. This federal arrangement was fundamentally conceived to bestow a degree of self-governance upon Eritrea, while concurrently preserving its integral ties to the Ethiopian state. Yet Emperor Haile Selassie systematically undermined this stipulated autonomy over time, culminating in 1962 with the formal incorporation and annexation of the territory as an integral Ethiopian province. This decisive act served as the catalyst for the genesis of an armed independence movement, a protracted and bitter struggle that would relentlessly afflict Ethiopia for the ensuing 3 decades. The arduous Eritrean quest for self-determination presented a singularly complex and intractable challenge for the imperial administration, primarily because it amalgamated a confluence of distinct origins of descent. Pronounced ethnic and linguistic divergences existed between the populace of Eritrea and other segments of the Ethiopian citizenry. Furthermore, stark religious schisms were evident between the predominantly Muslim inhabitants of the Eritrean lowlands and the predominantly Christian communities of the Ethiopian highlands. Compounding these factors were profound political disagreements concerning the precise extent of autonomy that Eritrea ought to wield within the overarching framework of the Ethiopian state. The emperor's predominant strategy in confronting the Eritrean insurrection was overwhelmingly militaristic, involving concerted efforts by Ethiopian armed forces to quell the burgeoning independence movement through overwhelming coercive power. This forceful methodology, however, proved largely ineffectual. Indeed, it inadvertently bolstered Eritrean nationalist sentiment by generating revered martyrs and by starkly illustrating the imperial government's resolute reluctance to address legitimate Eritrean grievances through diplomatic or political channels. Moreover, the protracted conflict catastrophically siphoned off invaluable national resources that could otherwise have been judiciously allocated towards developmental initiatives, simultaneously fostering an pervasive atmosphere of militarization that would inevitably cast a long and detrimental shadow over the future trajectory of Ethiopian politics. As the early 1970s unfolded, an undeniable realization began to crystallize. The venerable imperial system was confronting an existential crisis of legitimacy. The emperor, by this juncture in his octogenarian years, was progressively perceived as profoundly disconnected from the urgent requirements and burgeoning ambitions of the younger generations of Ethiopians. The government's belated and perceived insufficient reaction to a catastrophic famine that afflicted the northern provinces between 1973 and 1974 garnered widespread condemnation as profoundly wanting and utterly devoid of empathy. Extensive international media reportage of this tragic humanitarian disaster, which graphically depicted emaciated peasants succumbing to starvation while the imperial court ostensibly persisted in an extravagant lifestyle, forged a potent and damning public image of a governmental apparatus that had irrevocably severed its connection with the suffering populace it ostensibly served. The ultimate unraveling commenced in the nascent months of 1974, triggered by a cascade of industrial actions and public demonstrations spearheaded by a disparate coalition of societal factions. University students, dedicated educators, urban taxi operators, and ultimately, disaffected military contingents. What initially manifested as localized protests addressing specific grievances progressively transmuted into a sweeping and existential challenge to the very foundations of the imperial system itself. The emperor's belated endeavors to de-escalate the burgeoning crisis through a series of concessions and promised reforms were widely perceived as arriving far too late, interpreted not as authentic initiatives for change, but rather as telltale indicators of an enfeebled authority. The military council that ultimately seized control, officially designated as the Derg, a term signifying committee in the Amharic language, initially professed to be acting in steadfast allegiance to the emperor and the venerable monarchy. Nevertheless, it swiftly became unequivocally apparent that this military junta harbored its own distinct and radical blueprint for the fundamental metamorphosis of Ethiopian society. In September of 1974, Emperor Haile Selassie, a figure who had governed Ethiopia for well over 4 decades and who had ascended to the status of an international emblem of African dignity and sovereign independence, was divested of his formidable authority and subsequently placed under house arrest. This dramatic overthrow was orchestrated by a contingent of junior military officers who asserted their mandate to represent the Ethiopian populace's fervent yearning for profound societal transformation. The momentous collapse of Haile Selassie's reign heralded the demise of one of the globe's most ancient monarchies and simultaneously ushered in a fresh, tumultuous epoch in the annals of Ethiopian history. The venerable Solomonic dynasty, which had proudly asserted its unbroken dominion over Ethiopia for more than 7 centuries, and meticulously traced its royal lineage back to the legendary King Solomon and the fabled Queen of Sheba, met an abrupt and definitive end. The emperor himself tragically perished while in custody in 1975, under circumstances that continue to fuel considerable controversy and debate to this very day. The military junta, known as the Derg, initially helmed by General Aman Andum and subsequently under the more iron-fisted leadership of Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam, made grand declarations of intent to thoroughly modernize the nation and to comprehensively tackle the deep-seated social and economic maladies that had persistently afflicted the imperial system. They vociferously proclaimed a sweeping socialist revolution, meticulously nationalized all land and key industrial sectors, and embarked upon a series of ambitious, transformative programs designed to fundamentally restructure Ethiopian society. Concurrently, the nascent government adopted a considerably more bellicose and uncompromising stance regarding the protracted Eritrean conflict and various other burgeoning regional challenges. Nevertheless, the military government's dominion rapidly proved to be far more autocratic and oppressively severe than the imperial system it had so vehemently supplanted. The Derg systematically eradicated all forms of political dissent through a brutal and widespread campaign of state-sponsored terror, infamously dubbed the Red Terror, which tragically culminated in the deaths of thousands upon thousands of Ethiopian citizens. The government's ambitious socialist policies, despite their ostensibly benevolent initial intentions, frequently precipitated catastrophic economic failures and gravely exacerbated existing conditions, thereby contributing directly to recurrent devastating famines and a precipitous national economic decline. Furthermore, the military government found itself confronting an array of novel challenges, distinct from those that had ever beset the preceding imperial system. The prevailing geopolitical climate of the Cold War era regrettably created fertile ground for pervasive external intervention, with the Soviet Union and Cuba extending substantial military provisions and unwavering logistical support to the Derg, while conversely, the United States actively lent its backing to an assortment of disparate opposition factions. Regional conflicts intensified with alarming rapidity, as not only Eritrea, but also numerous other provinces experienced increasingly widespread and formidable armed insurgencies directly challenging the central authority. The decade of the 1980s inflicted fresh catastrophes upon Ethiopia, most notably a monumental famine that seized urgent international attention and galvanized a truly global humanitarian relief effort. The stark, harrowing images of emaciated children, broadcast worldwide across television screens, indelibly forged a drastically altered international perception of Ethiopia. No longer perceived as the proud, fiercely independent African nation that had valiantly repelled European colonialism, but rather as a country tragically synonymous with pervasive poverty, devastating famine, and profound human suffering. The military government's official response to this widespread famine was universally condemned as woefully inadequate and overtly politically motivated. The Derg faced severe accusations of weaponizing crucial food aid against rebellious regions and of prioritizing exorbitant military expenditures over the critical provision of famine relief. International aid initiatives, while undeniably salvaging countless lives, simultaneously served to underscore the government's glaring systemic failures and significantly fueled mounting opposition to its military rule. By the twilight of the 1980s, it had become unequivocally evident that the military government was progressively losing its grip on the deteriorating national situation. A multitude of armed opposition groups were actively operating across the entire expanse of the country, challenging the Derg's authority at every turn. The national economy lay in utter disarray, teetering on the brink of complete collapse, and the government's international diplomatic and financial support was rapidly eroding. As the Cold War drew to its conclusive end, the Soviet Union, grappling with its own profound internal political and economic turmoil, commenced a significant reduction in its backing for the Derg, thereby leaving the military government increasingly isolated on the global stage. The ultimate downfall arrived with startling swiftness in 1991, when a formidable coalition of opposition groups, spearheaded by the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, EPRDF, successfully seized control of the capital city, Addis Ababa, compelling Mengistu Haile Mariam to precipitously flee the country. The fall of this military government emphatically marked the cessation of 17 arduous years of socialist rule and simultaneously inaugurated yet another distinct and pivotal chapter in the intricate tapestry of Ethiopian history. The EPRDF, under the astute leadership of Meles Zenawi, solemnly pledged to institute a democratic federal system meticulously designed to address the deeply entrenched ethnic and regional tensions that had persistently beleaguered Ethiopia for many decades. The newly formed government promulgated a constitution that formally recognized the inherent right of all ethnic groups to self-determination, a provision that controversially included the explicit right to secession. This represented a radical and unprecedented departure from the policies of all preceding Ethiopian governments, which had invariably placed paramount emphasis on monolithic national unity and rigidly centralized control. One of the new government's inaugural and most consequential decisions was to sanction a referendum on independence for Eritrea. In 1993, the Eritrean populace voted overwhelmingly in favor of independence, culminating in Eritrea's emergence as a sovereign nation after a grueling 3-decade-long armed struggle. This outcome represented a painful and profound loss for many Ethiopians who had historically considered Eritrea an indissoluble and integral part of their cherished homeland. Yet it simultaneously eliminated a significant and long-standing source of regional conflict, thereby enabling both newly sovereign nations to concentrate on their respective national development agendas. The decades of the 1990s and 2000s witnessed a period of remarkable and sustained economic growth and comprehensive development across Ethiopia under the stewardship of the EPRDF. The government judiciously implemented a series of market-oriented economic reforms while concurrently preserving a robust and influential role for the state in overarching development planning. Extensive infrastructure projects were vigorously initiated, encompassing the construction of new arterial roads, significant hydroelectric dams, and modernized telecommunication systems. The national education system underwent a dramatic and expansive transformation, with numerous new universities being established and primary education becoming significantly more accessible throughout the country. Ethiopia also began to assume a far more proactive and influential role in regional and international affairs. The nation emerged as a substantial contributor to African Union peacekeeping operations and frequently hosted important international conferences, thereby bolstering its diplomatic standing. Ethiopian military forces actively participated in crucial peacekeeping missions in Sudan, Somalia, and other conflict-ridden zones, unequivocally demonstrating the country's profound commitment to fostering regional stability. However, the EPRDF government also attracted considerable censure for its increasingly authoritarian tendencies and its stringent restrictions on legitimate political opposition. While national elections were conducted with a degree of regularity, opposition parties consistently voiced grievances concerning pervasive harassment and inequitable treatment. Press freedom was severely curtailed, and civil society organizations faced significant impediments and restrictions on their operational activities. These escalating concerns generated considerable friction and tension with international donors and prominent human rights organizations. The government's overarching development strategy, while undeniably successful in stimulating considerable economic growth, paradoxically also engendered a fresh array of formidable challenges. Rapid and sustained population growth exerted immense and unsustainable pressure on finite land resources and natural assets. Accelerated urbanization created novel and complex social problems as vast numbers of people migrated from rural areas to burgeoning cities in pursuit of enhanced opportunities. Environmental degradation became an increasingly alarming concern as extensive forest lands were cleared for agricultural expansion and industrial development, contributing to ecological imbalance. In 2012, Meles Zenawi unexpectedly passed away, precipitating a critical leadership transition within the EPRDF. His designated successor, Hailemariam Desalegn, largely maintained many of the established policies, but quickly found himself grappling with escalating challenges stemming from intensifying ethnic tensions, growing political opposition, and mounting economic pressures. Widespread protests began to erupt in various parts of the country, particularly within the Oromia and Amhara regions, vividly reflecting profound dissatisfaction with government policies and persistent demands for greater political participation and inclusiveness. These protests intensified dramatically in 2015 and 2016, leading to the imposition of emergency rule and subsequent violent crackdowns by security forces. The government's heavy-handed response to these demonstrations was widely denounced by international observers and precipitated a crisis of legitimacy eerily reminiscent of those that had confronted previous Ethiopian administrations. In 2018, succumbing to overwhelming and mounting pressure, Hailemariam Desalegn tendered his resignation as prime minister. The subsequent selection of Abiy Ahmed as the new prime minister in 2018 heralded another pivotal turning point in Ethiopia's complex history. Abiy, a youthful and charismatic figure hailing from the Oromo ethnic group, pledged sweeping and transformative reforms aimed at comprehensively addressing the nation's profound political and social challenges. He promptly ordered the release of numerous political prisoners, extended invitations to exiled opposition groups to return to the country, and initiated a process of liberalizing the long-constrained political system. Abiy's most dramatic and widely lauded early accomplishment was the successful resolution of the protracted conflict with neighboring Eritrea. In 2018, he embarked on a historic journey to Eritrea, where he signed a landmark peace agreement with President Isaias Afwerki, formally bringing an end to the state of war that had persisted between the two nations since their devastating border conflict of 1998 to 2000. This monumental achievement deservedly earned Abiy the prestigious Nobel Peace Prize in 2019, making him the first Ethiopian ever to be bestowed with such a distinguished honor. However, Abiy's ambitious reforms, while well-intentioned, inadvertently unleashed powerful forces that ultimately proved exceedingly difficult to manage and control. The deliberate loosening of political restrictions paradoxically led to a discernible surge in ethnic tensions and intercommunal conflicts across various regions of the country. Long-suppressed grievances and historical injustices resurfaced with renewed vigor, and certain identity-based groups began to articulate territorial and political demands that fundamentally challenged the established federal system. The government found itself in a precarious struggle to simultaneously uphold law and order while diligently endeavoring to promote democratic reforms. The national situation became particularly intricate and volatile in the northern Tigray region, where the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, which had historically been the dominant political force within the EPRDF coalition, felt increasingly marginalized and disenfranchised by Abiy's reform agenda. Tensions between the federal government and the Tigray regional government escalated ominously throughout 2019 and 2020, eventually culminating in the tragic outbreak of armed conflict in late 2020. The ensuing conflict in Tigray represented an unprecedented and grave new challenge for Ethiopia. A devastating civil war that gravely threatened to fragment the meticulously constructed federal system and potentially lead to the outright disintegration of the country. The fierce fighting involved not only Ethiopian federal forces and Tigray regional forces, but also, controversially, Eritrean troops and various militia groups from neighboring regions, further complicating the humanitarian landscape. The human consequences were dire and severe, resulting in the deaths of thousands of people and the displacement of hundreds of thousands more. Hundreds of thousands of individuals found themselves uprooted, cast from their homes and communities. As the nation of Ethiopia stepped into the 2020s, it confronted a confluence of challenges, some echoing historical dilemmas, and others entirely novel. This venerable land continued to grapple with profound existential inquiries that had shaped its destiny across millennia. How to harmoniously blend its myriad identities into a unified whole. How to propel itself into modernity without sacrificing invaluable ancestral customs, and how to safeguard its sovereignty amidst increasing global interconnectedness. Yet these perennial struggles were now compounded by an array of contemporary pressures, an escalating demographic surge, the pervasive effects of climate change, the transformative power of technological innovation, and the intricate shifting landscape of international relations. the unfolding chronicle of Ethiopia, a land steeped in antiquity, is far from reaching its conclusion. This venerable country, which has steadfastly endured the ascent and collapse of vast empires, navigated the oppressive currents of colonialism, and weathered the tumultuous storms of revolution and conflict, persistently adapts and evolves. The Ethiopian populace, renowned for an extraordinary fortitude demonstrated throughout their extensive past, remains dedicated to forging a future that reveres their heritage while wholeheartedly embracing the boundless opportunities of tomorrow. What imbues Ethiopia's saga with such compelling resonance transcends mere longevity. Though indeed, few civilizations can assert such an unbroken continuum over an epochal span, but rather resides in its unwavering thematic threads of self-determination, adaptability, and steadfast resilience. From the majestic ancient kingdom of Aksum to its contemporary manifestation as a federal republic, Ethiopians have consistently showcased an exceptional capacity to assimilate fresh influences while meticulously safeguarding their core identity, to skillfully adjust to evolving circumstances while preserving their fundamental principles, and to surmount what often appeared to be insurmountable obstacles through sheer tenacity and inventive spirit. The Ethiopia of the present day stands in stark contrast to the Ethiopia of Aksum, or even that which existed under the reign of Haile Selassie. Nevertheless, certain defining characteristics persist with remarkable consistency. A profound pride in independence, which famously spurred the Aksumites to construct their formidable trading empire, ignited the strategic brilliance of Menelik II in his decisive victory over the Italians at Adwa, and fueled the unyielding spirit of resistance fighters during the Italian occupation, continues to profoundly shape Ethiopian perspectives on the global stage. The deep-seated religious devotion that inspired the breathtaking excavation of the rock-hewn churches at Lalibela and sustained the very essence of Ethiopian identity through centuries of formidable trials, retains a pivotal role within the fabric of Ethiopian society. Furthermore, the vibrant cultural creativity that has historically yielded distinctive art, profound literature, and captivating music persistently flourishes and undergoes dynamic evolution. Perhaps most critically, Ethiopia's unwavering commitment to charting its own distinct course, a path that neither succumbs to complete global isolation nor permits total absorption by external forces, continues to meticulously guide the nation's ongoing development. Throughout its extensive history, Ethiopia has consistently served as a crucible where diverse cultures, various faiths, and distinct traditions have not merely coexisted, but have profoundly influenced one another, thereby forging a unique and invaluable societal tapestry. This enduring legacy of synthesis and ingenious adaptation may well represent Ethiopia's most formidable asset as it confronts the multifaceted challenges of the 21st century. The esteemed coffee bean, a profound gift from Ethiopia to the global community, stands as an impeccable allegory for the nation's enduring contributions to human civilization. Much like the resilient coffee plant itself, Ethiopian culture possesses deep, tenacious roots that have enabled it to withstand periods of arid drought and tumultuous storms, to gracefully adapt to a myriad of environmental conditions, and ultimately to yield a produce that profoundly enriches the lives of people across the entire planet. The sweeping narrative of Ethiopia transcends the confines of a singular nation. It is an integral chapter within the grander human story of how societies emerge, evolve, adapt, and ultimately endure. As one might settle beside a warming fire, perhaps savoring a fragrant cup of Ethiopian coffee, and engage in contemplation of this extensive voyage through Ethiopian history, a profound appreciation surfaces for both the singular distinctiveness of the Ethiopian experience and its resonant universal themes. Indeed, every human society confronts the delicate imperative of balancing time-honored traditions with the impetus for change, of preserving its inherent identity while shrewdly adapting to novel circumstances, and of safeguarding its hard-won independence, while judiciously engaging with the broader international arena. Ethiopia's profound and protracted engagement with these very challenges offers invaluable insights and boundless inspiration for all of humanity. The extensive chronicle of Ethiopia serves as a potent reminder that history is not merely a compilation of dates, a recounting of battles, or a succession of rulers rising and falling, though undeniably each of these elements plays its part. Rather, it is fundamentally about the enduring human capacity to imbue existence with meaning, to meticulously construct vibrant communities, to diligently safeguard the invaluable legacies of the past, all while striving purposefully towards a more promising future. It illuminates the remarkable aptitude of human societies to not only survive, but to truly thrive, even when confronted by challenges that might initially appear utterly overwhelming. Ultimately, the epic narrative of the Ethiopian Empire unfurls as a profound testament to hope, the hope that national independence can indeed be preserved, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, the hope that diverse peoples can genuinely coexist in an atmosphere of peace and mutual respect, the hope that ancient wisdom and contemporary knowledge can be harmoniously fused to forge something inherently superior to what either could achieve in isolation. It is a story that steadfastly reminds us that the human spirit, much like the tenacious highland coffee plant, possesses deep, resilient roots and an extraordinary capacity for endurance, capable of yielding something truly beautiful and deeply nourishing even amidst the most arduous and challenging conditions. As the sun descends gracefully over the majestic Ethiopian highlands, casting elongated shadows across the ancient contours of a landscape where this extraordinary civilization has flourished for over 3 millennia, one is prompted to reflect upon the remarkable odyssey undertaken together through the annals of time. From the towering, enigmatic obelisks of Aksum to the awe-inspiring, rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, from the formidable castles of Gondar to the gleaming, modern edifices of Addis Ababa, from the triumphant victory at Adwa to the complex challenges of the contemporary era, the compelling story of Ethiopia continues its unfolding narrative. The eternal flame of Ethiopian civilization burns with an unyielding intensity, occasionally flickering with uncertainty amidst the winds of change, at other times blazing with brilliant radiance in moments of resounding triumph, yet never, ever extinguished. It is a sacred flame that has been meticulously tended by countless generations of Ethiopians, individuals who deeply understood their profound responsibility as guardians of something immensely precious and singularly unique. A civilization that belonged unequivocally to the African continent, while simultaneously being an indispensable thread in the tapestry of the wider human family. The very highlands where our narrative commenced still resonate with the ethereal echoes of ancient kings and queens, still reverberate with the devout prayers of countless pilgrims, and still bear witness to the daily struggles and quiet triumphs of ordinary people earnestly striving to construct more prosperous lives for themselves and their progeny. The morning mist continues its delicate dance over the majestic mountains, subtly carrying with it the collective dreams and fervent aspirations of a people who have never once forgotten that they are the proud inheritors of one of humanity's most ancient and truly remarkable civilizations. Within the bustling markets of Addis Ababa, vibrant hubs where merchants from across the African continent and beyond converge to trade, the palpable spirit of ancient Aksum endures and thrives. In the hallowed halls of schools and universities, where young Ethiopians diligently pursue knowledge spanning from traditional literature to cutting-edge modern technology, the visionary educational ideals of emperors such as Menelik II and Haile Selassie continue to yield abundant fruit. Within the venerable churches, where devout believers gather to worship in accordance with traditions that stretch back over 1,600 years, the unwavering faith that fortified Ethiopia through its most trying periods continues to impart profound strength and steadfast guidance. However, Ethiopia's ongoing narrative is not solely dedicated to the meticulous preservation of its illustrious past. It is equally and dynamically focused on the active creation of its future. The burgeoning cohort of young Ethiopians who are boldly establishing innovative businesses, crafting compelling artistic expressions, pioneering new technologies, and diligently working to resolve their nation's pressing challenges, are actively authoring fresh chapters in this ancient and enduring story. They carry within them the profound wisdom bequeathed by their ancestors, the fundamental understanding that independence must be perpetually earned and vigilantly defended, that diversity can indeed serve as a potent source of collective strength rather than a catalyst for division, and that adaptability combined with unwavering resilience are the fundamental keys to both survival and sustained prosperity. The challenges confronting modern Ethiopia are undeniably substantial and profoundly real. Rapid demographic expansion, widespread environmental degradation, persistent ethnic tensions, and pervasive economic inequality all demand immediate attention and the implementation of highly creative solutions. Nevertheless, these contemporary hurdles are not fundamentally disparate from those that Ethiopia has valiantly confronted throughout its extensive history. The formidable kingdom of Aksum, for instance, was compelled to adapt to shifting global trade routes and the emergence of new economic competitors. The medieval emperors were tasked with the delicate balancing act of accommodating the diverse demands of various regions and distinct peoples. Menelik II faced the monumental imperative of modernizing his nation while meticulously preserving its cherished independence. Haile Selassie was obliged to skillfully navigate the intricate complexities of the nascent modern international system while steadfastly upholding Ethiopian sovereignty. Each successive generation of Ethiopians has consistently discovered ingenious methods to address the exigencies of their specific era, all while meticulously safeguarding the most invaluable aspects of their cultural heritage. The current generation will, without a shadow of a doubt, follow suit, drawing deeply from the profound reservoirs of wisdom, boundless creativity, and inherent resilience that have sustained Ethiopian civilization for well over 3,000 years. The international community, too, stands to gain profound insights from Ethiopia's vast and enduring experience. In an epoch where numerous societies grapple intensely with intricate questions of identity, cultural diversity, and the pervasive forces of globalization, Ethiopia's exemplary model of maintaining its distinct cultural identity while actively engaging with the broader global sphere, offers truly invaluable perspectives. The nation's remarkable achievement in preserving its independence throughout the colonial period serves as a powerful demonstration that it is indeed feasible for smaller nations to safeguard their sovereignty, even when confronted by overwhelming external pressures, provided they possess the collective will, the strategic wisdom, and the unwavering unity to do so. Ethiopia's rich religious traditions, which have masterfully sustained their distinctive character while simultaneously remaining an integral part of the broader Christian family, furnish profound lessons concerning how faith communities can meticulously preserve their unique attributes while actively participating in global religious discourse. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church's masterful synthesis of foundational Christian theology with indigenous local traditions and practices eloquently illustrates how universal religious truths can be authentically expressed through particular cultural forms without ever compromising their essential meaning. Furthermore, the nation's vibrant artistic and literary traditions, which have continuously undergone dynamic evolution while steadfastly maintaining their unmistakable Ethiopian essence, powerfully demonstrate how cultures can remain both vibrant and profoundly relevant by judiciously embracing change while simultaneously honoring their deep-seated roots. Ethiopian music, visual art, and literature continue to both influence and be influenced by global trends, all the while retaining their uniquely and unmistakably Ethiopian identity. Perhaps most importantly, the profound narrative of Ethiopia impresses upon us the fundamental truth that historical trajectories are not preordained. Rather, societies consistently exercise agency in determining their responses to emergent challenges and burgeoning opportunities. The valiant Ethiopians who, at Adwa, elected to courageously resist Italian imperialistic encroachments, possessed the alternative of acquiescence. Similarly, the indomitable resistance fighters who steadfastly continued to oppose the Italian occupation could have instead opted for collaboration with the occupying forces. Furthermore, the visionary leaders who embarked upon the modernization of their nation while meticulously safeguarding its hard-won independence might have chosen a path of self-imposed isolation or a complete uncritical adoption of Western paradigms. At each pivotal juncture within Ethiopian history, both individuals and collective communities meticulously made deliberate choices that not only molded their own personal fortunes, but also profoundly influenced the destiny of their entire nation and, in certain instances, the broader global stage. The resounding victory achieved at Adwa served as an electrifying catalyst, inspiring burgeoning anti-colonial movements across the vast continents of Africa and Asia. Emperor Haile Selassie's unwavering championing of international law and the principle of collective security proved instrumental in forging the nascent global framework that emerged in the wake of the Second World War. Moreover, Ethiopia's foundational role in the establishment of the Organization of African Unity contributed significantly to the continent's emancipation from colonial rule and its subsequent developmental progress. These remarkable achievements were by no means preordained. They sprang directly from the conscious decisions made by a people who deeply comprehended their inherent capacity to forge their own future. This profound understanding that the course of history is shaped by human volition rather than by impersonal, indifferent forces is perhaps Ethiopia's most invaluable contribution to the world. As we bring our comprehensive exploration of Ethiopian history to its culmination, it behooves us to contemplate the profound lessons this venerable civilization can impart regarding the art of navigating existence skillfully within an intricate and demanding global landscape. Ethiopia's enduring experience powerfully suggests the feasibility of revering one's heritage while simultaneously welcoming forthcoming developments, of steadfastly upholding one's distinct character while engaging meaningfully with diverse peoples, and of conserving its cherished elements while reforming aspects that require modification. The Ethiopian methodology for confronting these inherent dilemmas has, understandably, not always been flawless, a condition inherent to all human societies, yet it has proven extraordinarily triumphant across extended periods. The undeniable fact that Ethiopian civilization has not only persisted, but flourished for more than 3 millennia, accommodating innumerable transformations while meticulously preserving its fundamental identity, stands as a compelling testament to the sagacity embedded within this particular approach. The revered coffee ceremony, which remains an integral ritual within Ethiopian communal existence, offers a quintessential symbol for this profound wisdom. The ceremony demands patience. It resolutely resists hurried execution. It fosters communal gathering, uniting individuals in an ambiance of shared identity and reciprocal esteem. It reveres ancestral practices while simultaneously accommodating personal flair and innovative input. This ritual transforms humble components, coffee beans, water, fire, into something that sustains both physical being and inner essence. Crucially, it cultivates an environment conducive to dialogue, contemplation, and interpersonal bonding. Much like the carefully orchestrated coffee ceremony, Ethiopian civilization has consistently grasped the principle that the truly significant aspects of existence unfold gradually. That collective well-being fundamentally supersedes singular accomplishments. That heritage and novelty can coexist synergistically. That unadorned components possess the potential for profound aesthetic and purposeful transformation. And that devoting moments to interpersonal engagement is vital for collective prosperity. These invaluable insights, forged over millennia of lived history in the Ethiopian highlands, are equally pertinent in the contemporary era as they were in the legendary time of the Queen of Sheba or during the construction by the builders of Lalibela. In our rapidly accelerating, globally linked, frequently disjointed modern society, Ethiopia's exemplary model of steadfast endurance, collective cohesion, ingenious flexibility, and foundational spiritual depth offers an alternative paradigm for navigating existence and achieving prosperity. The narrative of Ethiopia fundamentally narrates the chronicle of the victory of human fortitude against hardship, of the strength of collective entities to safeguard their most cherished principles while accommodating evolving conditions, and of the feasibility of upholding one's distinct character and sovereign status whilst interacting positively with the global community. It is a compelling story that imparts optimism and encouragement to everyone who encounters it, irrespective of personal origin or present situation. As the constellations emerge above the elevated plateaus of Ethiopia, as they have through innumerable epochs, they cast their luminous glow upon a territory that has bestowed upon the globe the commodity of coffee, profound age-old sagacity, aesthetic magnificence, and a compelling illustration of sustaining self-respect and sovereignty amidst formidable adversities. They illuminate a people who have retained the profound awareness of their custodial role over something invaluable and unparalleled, something that is a heritage shared by the entirety of humankind. The perpetual beacon of Ethiopian civilization persists in its radiant glow meticulously nurtured by successive cohorts who comprehend both the profound responsibility of their legacy and the boundless potential of their coming era. It is a flame that casts its glow not merely upon the elevated Ethiopian terrains, but across the entirety of mankind's odyssey, imparting to everyone the realization that with fortitude, sagacity, and unwavering perseverance, it is achievable to fashion something aesthetically pleasing and perpetually significant in this world. And so our narrative concludes at its genesis, with the soft undulations of oceanic waters caressing remote coastlines, with the ethereal morning fog gracefully weaving above venerable peaks, with the fragrance of roasted coffee portending fresh starts. The story of Ethiopia is by no means concluded. Indeed, its most pivotal narratives are still awaiting inscription, but the bedrock has been established by thousands of years of human endeavor, inventive spirit, and unwavering fortitude. Irrespective of the adversities and prospects that the future may present, the people of Ethiopia will confront them with the same spirit as their forebears, with dignity in their ancestry, assurance in their capacities, and optimism for the progeny's destiny. The brew has been consumed, the embers glow faintly, but the narrative persists. Somewhere in the Ethiopian highlands, a newborn emerges, destined to bear the torch of this venerable culture into forthcoming eras. Somewhere a scholar delves into the illustrious history, envisioning contributions to an even more resplendent tomorrow. Somewhere a creator crafts novel works that pay homage to antiquity. Somewhere an agriculturist sows crops to nourish future descendants. Somewhere a household convenes for the twilight repast, exchanging narratives and aspirations, perpetuating the timeless human discourse that has upheld Ethiopian culture for more than 30 centuries. This is the profound essence of the Ethiopian narrative. It extends beyond mere chronicles of monarchs and military engagements, of triumphs and setbacks, ascendancy and decline, becoming instead the perpetual narrative of common individuals accomplishing remarkable feats, of collectives safeguarding their cherished tenets while accommodating evolution, of a culture that has mastered the art of survival and prosperity through countless epochs. It is a story that is intrinsically Ethiopian, yet it resonates with universal humanity. For it is an integral part of the broader narrative of humankind, of how we forge purpose, construct societies, and transmit our principles to succeeding epochs. Ultimately, the story of the Ethiopian Empire transcends mere historical record. It is a prescient insight. It is a blueprint for societal accomplishment, illustrating what human societies can achieve when they integrate reverence for heritage with receptiveness to innovation, when they harmonize personal success with collective unity, and when they uphold their unique character whilst participating beneficially in the global arena. It is a story that serves as a poignant reminder that the odyssey of humankind is far from its conclusion, that fresh narratives await inscription, novel adversities demand confrontation, and unforeseen potentials beckon discovery. The perpetual beacon endures, and the narrative unfolds ceaselessly. The ceaseless march of time invariably propels existence forward, irrespective of individual moments or collective pauses. Life, in its multifaceted complexity, persistently goes on, unfurling new chapters and unforeseen developments for all involved. The grand narrative, a sprawling tapestry woven with countless threads of personal journeys and societal evolutions, thus never truly concludes, but rather perpetually continues its intricate unfolding. Each perceived ending merely signifies a transition, a pivotal turning point from which fresh arcs emerge, ensuring that the overarching saga maintains its dynamic progression, always beckoning towards an uncertain yet inevitable future.